Okay, so interestingly enough, I just saw some event being unlocked. This event. Attack, hit opponent while the character is off-field. So to attack and reach out. Really weird. 24 days. Just homework. Test run 3 days.
Leave it to me! A turning point in fate! Stay away from me! Stay back! A turning point.
Ha! Teamwork is trick. Fine, fine, boom!
Coming to be.
Yeah. Blazing delight. Dumpy, dumpy.
Okay! New life! Burst forth!
Huh? I'm going in. Fight and flash. Yahoo! Time for takeoff.
Watch out! The story has only just begun!
Let's light it up! Teamwork is... Dare to mess with me? Truth repeats it. Think you can get away?
That was funny. Yeah.
Smash and grab! I never...
Observe, to dust. Beware the creatures of the night.
Go claw! Control breathing! Let's move!
Close your eyes. Observe.
Moment of silence for me. Yeah, I gotta do something. Probably something like that. Not sure how that. Okay, nice, amazing even. Why did I do it here? I am not sure. But what I do know is that I need 6 more. To do that, I gotta go here. And go for 9 of them, at least. Mhm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Doesn't have energy recharge. 9. Okay, and now not sure. %, goblet. 19 out of 21. So let's grab a bit more of things like that. %. Yeah, that doesn't seem that cool. Create damage bonus. That is actually reasonably cool. Yeah, like that. And maybe even more attack %. Getting bonus energy recharge, but then a bunch of flat substats. Okay, let's go like this. Your charge, crit rate, HP %. That's nice. Some of it is fine, some of it is not. Well, either way, gotta go here. And maybe I should try to do like level 8 Level 9. Tests.
Rise with the sun!
Huh? Off we go! Let's light it up! Everybody stand back! You two! Time to...
Wrath from the skies!
Nope. Nope. No. Let's go for... I don't have Larissa yet. But I do have some artifacts. It might be good. It has been a problem. 50% defense. Really? Okay, let's just... Okay, I don't need a better flower. Yeah, create damage, I guess. Nice. That was 7? Yeah, that was 7. Nice. Okay, so maybe I just need to trash every feather and flower that I don't need. Are there any plunge damage dealers that scale off of defense?
The sky in Natlan. Oh. What happened
Hear
now?
what happened with the sky in Natlan?
More important question. Plunge damage. Scales of attack. Гляди, люк. Plunge damage.
The sky in Natlan.
It scales off of attack.
What happened now?
Did you hear what happened
Yeah,
with the
it's
sky
nice.
in Natlan?
But not really necessary. AR is important in some circumstances. So having it as a substat is relatively
This guy
useful.
in that lamp. Oh, what happened now?
Okay,
Did you hear
For a
what
moment.
happened with the sky in Natlan?
I like their banter. Oh, yay! No. First of all, B. But then lock assistance. Edit. A recommended plan: attack percentage, crit rate, crit damage. Fire, Electra, Anima, attack. Not interested, not interested. Not interested. Not interested. Actually, let's just wait a bit with those ones. Hmm. Ooh, okay. Not bad. For someone who scales of attack.
The neighbors actually will.
Uh, mm. That doesn't seem all that good. For obvious reasons. One. I mean, it's pretty much the same. Two, 392. One, two, three, four. Who even uses this set right now? Does she even enjoy crit rate set? What are her stats currently? She doesn't need more crit damage. One, two, three, four. Nice.
There's a strange
Today's
wonder in your
recommendation
room.
is the steak.
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Osmanthus wine tastes the same as I remember. But where are those who share the memory? Every
It's been getting quite busy recently.
Osmanthus wine tastes the same as I remember. But where are those who share the memory?
Why does Ashru sit up on the counter? To welcome our clients, of course. A kitty's gotta earn his kibble somehow.
Today's recommendation is the steak.
Ancient hour.
Where do you want?
Come take a look. There will definitely be something.
Today's recommendation is
Emotions are like a raging torrent that surges through the mind. More often than not, if you try to hold them back, you'll be swept away by their unstoppable force. And if you try to ignore them entirely, you'll end up tearing yourself to pieces. Come take a look. There will definitely be something that catches your eye.
It's been getting quite busy recently. Welcome. How can I help you?
Come take a look. There will definitely be something that catches your eye.
Today's recommendation is the steak. Welcome. How can I help you?
Why does Ashru sit up on the counter? To welcome our clients, of course. A kitty's gotta earn his kibble somehow.
Is the steak.
Come take a look. There will definitely be something that catches your eye.
Welcome. How can I help
Where
you?
the fuck is he?
How can I help you?
Ancient hour. Truly is fascinating.
Which should I choose?
Osmanthus wine tastes the same as I remember. But where are those who share the memory?
Emotions are like a raging torrent that surges through the mind. More often than not, if you try to hold them back, you'll be swept away by their unstoppable force. And if you try to ignore them entirely, you'll end up tearing yourself to pieces.
Osmanthus wine tastes the same as I remember. But where are those who share the memory?
Don't trust your eyes uncritically. People only see what they want to, so don't be your own fool.
What should I choose?
Boats are made for transferring commodities back and forth. And those that come across Liyue tend to stay a while. So it is where many things come to settle.
Emotions are like a raging torrent that surges through the mind. More often than not, if you try to hold them back, you'll be swept away by their unstoppable force. And if you try to ignore
Osmanthus
them
wine
entirely,
tastes the same as I
you'll end
remember.
up tearing yourself to pieces.
Where do you want to go next? If you'd like to see Liyue's tourist spots, I have a few references. Osmanthus wine tastes the same as I remember. But where are those who share the memory?
Don't trust your eyes uncritically. People only see what they want to, so don't be your own fool.
Osmanthus wine tastes the same as I remember. But where are those who share the memory? Every journey has its final
Emotions are like a raging torrent that surges through the mind. More often than not, if you try to hold them back, you'll be swept away by their unstoppable force. And if you try to ignore them entirely, you'll end up tearing yourself to pieces.
The neighboring nation of Liyue has the most prosperous commercial port in all of Tibet. Oh, which should I choose?
Truly is fascinating.
Star Snatch Cliff is known for its views.
Where do you want to go next? If you'd like to see Liyue's tourist spots, I have
Why
a
does
few
Ashru sit up on the counter? To welcome our clients, of course. A kitty's gotta earn his kibble somehow.
I guess I'll post the commission at the Adventurers Guild. Star Snatch Cliff is known for its views. Welcome. How can I help you?
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Which should I choose? Star Snatch Cliff is known for its views.
Boats are made for transferring commodities back and forth, and those that come across Liyue tend to stay a while. So it is where many things come to settle.
Prosperous commercial port in all of Tibet.
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Oh, which should I choose? Star Snatch Cliff is known for its views. Welcome. How can I help you?
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Don't trust your eyes uncritically. People only see what they want to. So don't be your own fool.
Uh-huh. Ooh.
The neighboring nation of Liyue has the most prosperous commercial port in all
Ancient
of
alchemy
Tibet.
truly is fascinating.
Osmanthus wine tastes the same as I remember.
Welcome. How can I help you?
But where are those who share the memory?
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
You're also here for Moscow's
Every journey has its final day. Don't rush.
Which should I choose?
Ancient alchemy truly
Os-
is fascinating.
Welcome. How can I help you? Star Snatch Cliff is known for its views. Oh, I guess I'll post a commission at the Adventurers Guild.
Boats are made for transferring commodities back and forth, and those that come across Liyue tend to stay a while. So it is where many things come to settle.
In all of Tibet.
Osmanthus wine tastes the same as I remember. But where are those who share the memory?
I guess I'll post a commission at the Adventurers Guild.
And a radish veggie soup.
Why does Ashru sit up on the counter? To welcome our clients, of course. A kitty's gotta earn his kibble somehow.
Truly is fascinating.
Welcome. How can I help you? Star
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Osmanthus wine tastes the same as I remember.
Don't trust
Where
your
are
eyes
those who
uncritically.
share the memory?
People only see what they want to. So don't be your own fool.
Oh, which should I choose?
The neighboring nation of Liyue has the most prosperous commercial port in all of Tibet.
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Where do you want to go next? If you'd like to see Liyue's tourist spots, I have a few references.
Oh, which should I choose?
You're also here for Mondstadt's
neighboring
wine.
nation
of Liyue has the most prosperous commercial port in all of Tibet.
Why does Ashru sit up on the counter?
Ancient alchemy
To welcome our clients, of course. A kitty's gotta earn his kibble somehow.
Oh, which should I choose?
A radish veggie soup. The neighboring nation of Liyue
Osmanthus wine tastes the same as I remember.
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Oh, which should I choose?
Welcome. How can I help you?
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Don't trust your eyes uncritically. People only see what they want to. So don't be your own fool.
The neighboring nation of Liyue has the most prosperous commercial port in all of Tibet.
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating. Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Come take a
Today's
look.
recommendation
There will definitely be something that catches your eye.
commercial port in all of Tibet.
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Бля.
Emotions are like a raging torrent that surges through the mind.
Definitely be something
More
that catches
often
your
than
eye.
not, if you try to hold them back, you'll be swept away by their unstoppable force. And if you try to ignore them entirely, you'll end up tearing yourself to pieces.
Truly is fascinating.
Today's recommendation is the steak.
Come take a look. There will definitely be something that catches your eye.
Welcome. How can I help you?
Ancient alchemy truly is fascinating.
Today's
Why does Ashru sit up on the counter?
Rise!
To welcome our clients, of course. A kitty's gotta earn his kibble somehow.
Haven't you heard? There's a strange wanderer near Wolfendom.
Ancient alchemy truly is
The neighboring nation of Liyue has the most prosperous commercial port in all of that. Today's recommendation is the steak.
Come take a look. There will definitely be something that catches your eye.
Welcome. How can I help you?
truly is fascinating.
Don't trust your eyes uncritically. People only see what they want to. So don't be your own fool.
Today's recommendation is the steak.
Haven't you heard? There's a strange wanderer near Wolfendom.
Ancient alchemy.
Welcome. How can I help you? It's been getting quite busy recently.
Come take a look. There will definitely be something that catches your eye.
Ancient
Emotions are like a raging torrent that surges through the mind.
Port in all of
More often than not, if you try to hold them back, you'll be swept away by their unstoppable force. And if you try to ignore them entirely, you'll end up tearing yourself to pieces.
Come take a look. There will definitely be something that catches your eye.
How can I help you? It's been getting quite busy recently.
Come take a look. There will definitely be something that catches your eye.
Ancient alchemy
The
truly
neighboring
is
nation of
fascinating.
Liyue has the most prosperous commercial port in all of Tibet. Today's recommendation is the steak.
Don't trust your eyes uncritically. People only see what they want to. So don't be your own fool.
The neighboring nation of Liyue has the most prosperous commercial port in all of Tibet. Today's recommendation is the steak.
Come take a look. There will definitely be something that catches your eye.
The neighboring nation of Liyue has the most prosperous commercial port in all of Tibet.
Why does Ashru sit up on the counter? To welcome our clients, of course. A kitty's gotta earn his kibble somehow.
Steak.
Haven't you heard? There's a strange wanderer near Wolfendom.
Welcome. How can I help you?
Don't trust your eyes uncritically. People only see what they want to. So don't be your own fool.
Haven't you heard? There's a strange wanderer near Wolfendom. Welcome. How can I help you?
It's been getting quite busy recently.
Come take a look.
Why does Ashru sit up on the counter? To welcome our clients, of course. A kitty's gotta earn his kibble somehow.
Okay, that was nice. That was pretty fucking nice. Enjoy.
Emotions are like a raging torrent that surges through the mind. More often than not, if you try to hold them back, you'll be swept away by their unstoppable force. And if you try to ignore them entirely, you'll end up tearing yourself to pieces.
Covenant wary, but excited. And you say this will infect all those who come into contact with it, and they shall never be free of it. Precisely, I replied. So use it carefully, and do not open it until you are far from here. And I handed her the jar of glitter. Covenant wary, but excited. And you say this will infect all those who...
Yes.
Of profit margins. $184,000 in annual income for the owner. From $100,000 to $1 million. That's a big range.
I know, sounds like a great idea, right? But if you're looking for side hustles that you would want to pursue, maybe you want to look into our side hustle database first. You can filter by category, by what skills you have, and even by how much money you want to invest in this side hustle. The hustle team published an update last year, and the list now comes with over 100 different business ideas. You can snatch a QR code here or use this link in the description to grab the list completely free.
Now, some legal scholars have argued that self-storage businesses just have it too easy because there's really no industry that competes directly with self-storage. Laws surrounding self-storage, they often pass without any opposition. It's like nobody's really paying attention to this thing. And there's this remarkable imbalance of rights and duties precisely because nobody has pushed for customer protections.
And Americans play along because self-storage is really convenient and people kind of need it, or at least maybe they don't notice until they get that weird bill in the mail. But there's another side effect to self-storage, one that cities have noticed and have started to course correct.
Last Thursday, the City Council passed a zoning ordinance amendment banning new self-storage facilities from popping up in Providence.
Palm Bay City leaders are debating blocking new self-storage facilities.
But now the city wants to put a moratorium on future self-storage businesses like Field.
Cities in at least 15 states have now started to ban the development of new self-storage units in their turf. That Hasn't happened here in Kenosha, though. In Chicago, the city council passed an ordinance that prohibits self-storage in downtown residential and commercial areas. They've now restricted them mostly to industrial-type zones. Because what does a self-storage business do for a city or an urban center? It's a big block of windowless brick or concrete. It doesn't look great, and aesthetics are not the main problem. As much as it contains all these tiny vaults of priceless old furniture, there's nobody inside. That's a big problem. Now, the build is profitable, it generates tax revenue for the city, but no jobs. 1 or 2 jobs are just too few for such a massive amount of space, especially if it's set up in a premium location near the city center. Now, Yonkers, New York is probably the perfect example of this, because who needs more storage space than a New Yorker in a tiny apartment?
So this is the cheapest apartment in all of Manhattan.
After over a dozen self-storage businesses opened up in the city limits, people started realizing that they were becoming Manhattan's warehouse and fought to block new developments. Same case with Rockdale, that's east of downtown Atlanta. They requested a moratorium on new self-storage developments so they could review their zoning code. But the problem is that you can't forbid construction, at least not easily, and these moratoriums, they're all temporary. Cities have to somehow find a new combination of wording for their urban codes to push these businesses outside of their city limits, or at least outside of the urban areas where they want real foot traffic businesses. And self-storage in cities is just a terrible regression in urban planning. What you want is a walkable city, a city with retail and residential areas within walking distance, and these long walls of self-storage businesses, they're the opposite of that. Now, Denver came up with an elegant solution. They managed to adjust their code to forbid self-storage near light rail stations, therefore keeping this stuff out of walkable areas. And this aligns with this whole trend of transit-oriented development. It just didn't align with our travel budget. New York City, for example, has kept all storage locations limited to industrial zones for years. It's such a crazy example of a good business that's actually not great for everyone. Now, we seem to be in a phase where prices have stabilized after a peak in 2023, but they might start climbing again as demand increases and city rules now slow down constructions. It sounds like the best chance for cities to fast track those urban planning adjustments if they want to keep these brick walls outside of their urban centers. Self-storage actually originated in Texas, where most homes don't have basements or the right infrastructure to survive a tornado, and still, Texas refuses to build tornado-proof homes. I made a whole video about that. You should check it out. And if self-storage is sounding like a good business idea, don't forget to grab our side hustle database for other businesses that you could run that aren't getting banned. Link below. Oh, and subscribe to the Hustle channel for more stories like this.
Give me crit rate. I'm not sure what to think about it and what to do about it. Like, it's bad, it's terrible, but it still can be better than either of this. Okay. No. No. I need to... Why the fuck do you take up 4 gigs? You also. Also you.
Bare fists at the start of the game, so the early beginnings were business as usual.
Yeah, but I can only use rune words.
I hit level 2 and unlocked my first skill point. I picked the Might Aura for the increase in damage, boosting my punch from 1 to 2 to 1 to 3. That's technically a 50% increase to my max damage, which does sound a lot more impressive than 1 extra point of damage. A somewhat unexpected challenge at the start of this run was to actually stay naked. Non-magic items are automatically equipped on pickup if you have an empty gear slot, so by accidentally clicking on such an item I would equip it and break the rules. Now those items are very weak and didn't give me much of an advantage, and I made sure to throw them away as soon as I noticed, but still it was a bit annoying. I continued my Knuckle Crusade through Act 1, and once I hit level 6 I unlocked Holy Fire, a gearless weakling's best friend. This aura adds flat fire damage to your attacks, in contrast to Might scaling your physical damage by a percentage. Absolutely perfect for someone fighting demons without a weapon. The added fire damage to my punches alone would make this aura a no-brainer for this paladin, but this aura also adds a periodic pulse of fire damage to enemies around you, increasing my attack damage several times over and some free AoE. Yes, please. This was a big power spike. I dumped the rest of my saved up skill points into the Holy Fire synergy Resist Fire for even more fire damage. And then I moved on to a very important side quest in Act 1, the Forgotten Tower, because the Countess at the bottom of the Forgotten Tower cellar has a special rune drop, almost guaranteeing a few runes to drop every time you take her down, making her by far the most reliable source of runes in the game, and thus an obvious farming spot for this character. The key to learning something new is to stick with it, and the key to not quitting is to make learning fun and engaging, and that's what's so special about this video sponsor, Boot.dev, because they have created a fun and engaging journey to learn backend development from scratch. Boot.dev is a... The game was catching on to what I was doing at this point, and it started dropping some cool items for me that I couldn't use, like this very rare unique sash, Lenny Mode. Well, that's what you sign up for when you do a gear restricted run, I guess. I did several repeat runs of the Countess, scoring some nice runes along the way, and I kept going until I found a T rune and an L rune. I also found plenty of Rals and Tals, which were really useful, but those were for later levels. And after that farming session, it was time to make my first rune word, and with that, my first piece of equipable gear. I bought a 2-socketed scimitar from Charcy, my base item of choice for the rune word that I had in mind. And by the way, look at this absolutely sick wand that I found. 3 to raise skeleton, 2 to skeleton mastery, and 1 to amplify damage. Imagine finding this on your brand new summon necromancer. But back to this character. I socketed the Tyr and the L into the sword to make steel, a rune word with some extra damage, attack speed, a bit of attack rating, 50% chance to cause open wounds, and more. And I guess that now is as good of a time as any to mention that rune words can only be made in normal socketed items, not in magic or higher rarity of any kind, only plain old grey items with sockets. Steel is a decent all-round weapon, with the biggest downside being its rather low damage modifier, but with my now level 10 Holy Fire aura, damage was taken care of, and the quick attacks and attack rating bonus was very nice. And open wounds can be pretty powerful too later in the game as it scales with your character's level. With my first piece of equipment in hand and some extra levels from the repeated Countess grind, I moved on towards the end of the act quickly. To move on, all I had to do was defeat the first act boss, Andariel, whose main weakness was my only strength. She has negative fire resistance, so unsurprisingly I defeated the first act boss easily. Just a few hits was all it took. Going into the second act, I did some reading up on the bottom of the barrel rune words that no one ever makes, and I realized that I had the runes available to make another one right away. I bought a 2-socketed helm from Farah, and with a Neff and a Tyr, I made Nadir. A strange helm with a few stats, but then also minus to light radius and minus to gold find. I honestly didn't know if this helm made me better or worse, but I liked the idea of wearing anything at all to fill out some more gear slots. Blasting my way through the second act, I reached level 17 in the Maggot Lair. This level unlocked the Tal rune, and with that another rune word, and compared to Nadir, this was a really good one. A Tal rune and an Eth rune in a 2-socketed body armor creates stealth. A great armor for spellcasters thanks to the 25 FCR, but faster run speed, hit recovery, and a smattering of other decent stats are very solid for any character, mine included. Duriel was up next, and he's a tough boss for low-level characters, especially melee characters that need to land attacks on him, between his Holy Freeze aura slowing you and knocking you into hit recovery to interrupt your attacks. But with good damage from my high-level Holy Fire aura, I banked on that I would only need to land a few handful of hits, and hoped that my potions could keep me alive for that long. I did get really low at one point during this fight, but with the occasional rejuvenation potion I could stay alive. While I did struggle to connect with my sword, it was indeed the case that my high damage made up for it when an attack actually did hit, and I defeated the second act boss with a very modest amount of attacks. I picked up the only piece of his loot drop that was useful to me, and then I moved on to Act 3. I defeated Duriel at level 19, and when going into the third act I had another idea for the jungle area specifically. Holy Fire added a lot more damage to my attacks than it did with its radial ping damage, but the latter was starting to get up there in damage too, and with the jungle hosting enemies that were weaker individually but in very big groups, I wanted to maximize my area damage. I had saved a 2-socketed short staff that I found earlier, and now that I was level 19, I put Tyr and Ral into the staff, with the Ral rune itself being the reason I needed to wait until 19. This makes the Sorceress rune word Leaf, but one of the skill bonuses is not exclusive to the Sorceress, the +3 to all fire skills, boosting my Holy Fire aura from level 14 to level 17. This was such a treat to have in the jungle, as monsters fell by simply walking into my vicinity. I believe this is what they call aura farming, and against enemies that could withstand my mere presence, I still had the steel scimitar on my weapon switch for dishing out quick fire enchanted attacks. I would talk more about the act since I had such a good time here, but to be honest, it was mostly looking like this. Though I did encounter my very first fire immune enemy, which was bad news because I dealt 100% fire damage. I could skip the enemy because the quest item was in the chest rather than in the enemy's loot table, but I lied when I said that my damage was 100% fire damage. My scimitar still dealt some physical damage, so to remind myself what it feels like to play a non-paladin class, I duked it out with a shaman in honorable melee combat. I expected the High Council of Travancore to pose a big threat to me, but I guess none of them are fire immune in normal difficulty, so while I had to swing my sword more times than I had done for the rest of the act combined, it was still a decisive victory, but credit to them for making me bust out the rejuvenation potions again. But after defeating the Council, I faced a problem. I was strictly allowed to only wear rune words, but to progress I had to equip Kalim's Will, distinctly not a rune word, and destroy the orb in Travancore to descend into the Endurance of Hate. But here's a loophole, explanation for you. All consumables were allowed, and what defines a consumable? It's consumed on use, right? And, well, as Kalim's Will disappears before our eyes as soon as it hits the orb, I think it's safe to say that Kalim's Will is clearly a consumable. Then I ran through the Endurance of Hate straight to Mephisto. He did decent damage to me, but fell a bit short to really threaten my life pool. I did decent damage to him too, but now I was really missing a lot. I took down the boss without too much trouble in the end, but after the fight I inspected my character screen, and my chance to hit Mephisto was a mere 47%. As I progressed deeper into the game, my needs from my gear grew, and it was only going to get tougher and tougher to meet all of those needs with only 4 gear slots. In Act 4, my overpowered progress was starting to slow down. Enemies were now sporting higher damage attacks as well as bulky defensive stats, including several enemies with fire resistance. I had not found much in the way of runes except the odd tier and F since I left the Forgotten Tower, so I pushed on towards the Hellforge, hoping to score a build-defining rune drop. Getting through to the Hellforge proved to be tough. The Holy Fire aura still carried me, but both my chance to hit and my defensive stats made me a poor fighter. But I eventually defeated Hephasto and grabbed the Hellforge hammer. I took Mephisto's Soulstone to the Hellforge and smashed it. And by the way, the Hellforge hammer, clearly another consumable. Unfortunately, I only scored a lowly Eld rune from the Hellforge, one of the worst runes I could have gotten, so no gear upgrades from the Hellforge. I had not found a single rune higher than Ral yet, but I did have a lot of Rals. Dreaming of a shield before going up against the elemental damage in the Chaos Sanctuary and Diablo, I decided to cube 3 of them to make an Orc rune, and then with a 3-socketed Paladin shield with an inherent 5 to all resistance bonus, I made Ral Orc Tal, Ancient's Pledge, a shield rune word with a massive boost to my resistances. And this is the reason why I picked the Paladin for this challenge, because their class-specific shields can have bonuses to all resistances or your attack damage while still being non-magical, allowing you to make rune words in them with additional bonuses. This was a good upgrade, and it also marked a milestone for my character as he was now fully geared for the first time. Well, as fully geared as he was ever going to get anyway. Diablo was a tough fight too, and almost immediately he beamed me down to just 15 HP remaining with his lightning attack. I managed to escape, but that was a rough start to the fight, especially considering that I had just upgraded my resistances significantly with my new shield. Remember when I said that I was a poor fighter disguised by my strong holy fire attack? Of course you did, I said it like a minute ago. But this issue didn't just persist, it got worse. And now against Diablo I had an embarrassing 36% chance to hit. I didn't plan on using holy fire as a crutch forever, and Act 4 really made me feel like it was time for a respec. But knowing that it would feel better once I was in Act 5 with fewer fire resistant enemies, I stuck it out for now. Doing my best to avoid the major parts of Diablo's firestorm and lightning spells, and then trying to get a few swings in when I could, I chipped away at his health bar. I went through a lot of potions for this fight, but in the end, Diablo fell to the floor. A victory against the Lord of Terror, but I didn't feel great about my character at this point. Though as I mentioned, I thought Holy Fire would feel stronger again in the 5th act, and it surely did. My chance to hit anything was absolutely terrible right now, but with the strong aura, most enemies were easily taken care of. After killing Shenk the Overseer to stop the siege of the barbarian town, I went to Larsak and begged him to socket a belt for me so that I could make a belt rune word, but no matter how hard I tried, it couldn't be done. And let me tell you, playing with just 4 quick slots for potions was a major inconvenience for this run. In the Frozen River, I found a unique sword that was basically made for my build. Kinemil's Awl, a 2-handed sword with +6 to Holy Fire. What a cruel twist of fate to find an item like this when I couldn't use it. I threw the sword back on the ground, and while it stung, I actually think that I wouldn't really have liked to give up my shield for more damage anyway, since almost all of my resistances came from my shield alone. And speaking of resistances, with only 4 gear slots it would eventually become difficult to get my resistances up to a good level, even as a paladin, so I made sure to rescue Anya from her frozen prison. As her way of saying thanks for saving me from certain death, Anya went back to town and then closed her town portal behind her. Oh, don't mind me, I didn't want to leave this place anyway. But Mala was for some reason happy to have that rude girl back safely, so she gave me a reward instead. The Scroll of Resistances, for a permanent increase of 10 to all my resistances. After maxing out my Holy Fire aura fully with 20 points, I started putting my skill points into Seal, a quick multi-hit attack with an additional attack rating bonus, resulting in a decent boost to my single target damage output. And that was a timely upgrade, as I was then heading into battle against the 3 ancient barbarians guarding the mountain and the entrance to the Worldstone Keep. My chance to hit had improved somewhat thanks to extra levels and a slight AR boost from Seal. It was still just about 50%, but with faster attacks and at least hitting every other swing, my fierce slashes dealt good damage to the ancients. And about a minute 30 after the fight began, I defeated the last of them. The only real remaining problem before the final boss was Lister and the Minions of Destruction. They simply overpowered me in melee combat. I tried cheesing them by walking in circles around them and let my aura ping them down, but they have decent fire resistance and high life regen, so that didn't seem like it was going to work out. So instead I walked them back towards the entrance and periodically attacked them when one of them walked a little bit ahead of the others. And here the open wounds from steel came in really clutch, because as long as a monster is bleeding, their health regen completely stops. And plenty of potions and portals to town later, I defeated Lister. I slowly grinded Bale's health bar down with Seal and Holy Fire to secure my victory over the first difficulty. But with my slashing power fading and the resistance penalty of Nightmare coming up, I felt that my melee fighting days were over. Before I moved on to Nightmare, I spent 2 minutes shopping for a specific scepter from Drognen, because once I moved on to Nightmare, it was time. What time? Hammer time. I respec my character and put as many points as possible into Blessed Hammer, then a few points into Holy Shield for some survivability, 1 point into Concentration, which for some reason increases the damage of Blessed Hammer even though it's a spell, and then the rest of my points into the Blessed Hammer synergy, Vigor. Next, I went to create my new awesome Hammerdin weapon with the Socketed Scepter that I bought earlier, and I used my last Tyrian L runes to create another steel so that I would be allowed to equip it. Some of you might have seen this coming already, but it did not turn into the steel rune word at all, but a gemmed scepter. And here's the reason. The steel rune word specifies that it works only in swords, axes and maces. And while the scepter is a mace class weapon, it even says so in the item's description. For the sake of rune words, the scepter is its own class of item and not simply a mace. Since gemmed is not a valid rune word, I sadly had to throw it away. I guess you never stop messing up your rune words even after thousands of hours in this game. It was a real shame that I bricked the weapon, but Blessed Hammer was still a powerful spell to get me started in Nightmare, good damage and large AoE, although a bit wonky with how the hammers spiral outwards from the caster, and it is also a ranged attack, meaning that I could keep my distance from dangerous enemies if I had to. But speaking of weapons, I did find an ethereal crystal sword in the Den of Evil, an unassuming drop at first glance but with a lot of potential, but more on that later. For now, I pushed on through Nightmare, spinning hammers around me like some sort of Carpenter trickshot competitor. Once I reached level 30, I put a skill point into Redemption, an aura which periodically converts nearby fallen enemies to life and mana, a nice addition to the build to top me up after each encounter. Weaker enemies fell quickly to my hammer spam, and against strong enemies that I couldn't hammer down before they got to me, I stutter stepped backwards, leaving a field of hammers behind me as I walked away from them, minimizing the damage I took while they kept walking into the damage I put out. Going into the Forgotten Tower for the quest, I was debating whether to stay and farm the Countess or not, but as she dropped an Am rune on the quest kill, the best rune I could have hoped for, I didn't really have to make the decision in the end. I hurried back to normal to make use of the socketing quest from Larsuk, using it on the ethereal crystal sword I found to get 4 sockets. Then by cubing most of my other decent mid-runes up to a Thal, I had all I needed for a major upgrade. I put Tal, Thal, Ort and Nam into the sword, being extra careful to not screw up 2 rune words in a row, and that made the Spirit rune word an absolutely amazing weapon for casters. Plus 2 to all skills, 27 FCR, which although is a low roll is still a lot, and then 100 extra mana, almost doubling my total. And it even had some defensive stats on top too, like the 22 to Vitality, an absolutely amazing weapon upgrade for my Paladin. With more damage, faster hammer spam and more mana to sustain the barrage, I made short work of the rest of Nightmare's first act, including Andariel, who I hammered down with holy magic in no time. She dropped a Butcher's Pupil with a high damage roll, a strong melee weapon for Nightmare, or even hell if you can upgrade it or if you're up for a bit of a grind. In the desert, I had yet another base item drop with a lot of potential, a crown shield with 4 open sockets and a free plus 16 to all resistances. The Spirit Sword granted me so much power, but Spirit can actually be made in shields as well, and I said before that the Paladin shield's inherent magical bonuses was the reason for going with the Paladin, but the fact that they can roll with 4 sockets, something other shields can't until you start finding elite level shields in hell, was equally as powerful. I was lacking most of the required runes to make another Spirit, but once those dropped I would have another easy gear upgrade. Soon after, I reached every Hammerdin's nightmare, the Maggot Lair. The narrow tunnels are a terrible place for swirly hammers, with the dirt balls eating my spells as quickly as I cast them. I could still hit enemies by walking as close to them as possible, but it was finicky to set up and I could only take on 1 enemy at a time this way. Though to be honest, if the inconvenience of not getting full value from my AoE was my biggest complaint, things weren't too bad in Act 2. And that was indeed the case, because after the Maggot Lair, the rest of Act 2 was smooth sailing. I even found my second Am rune in the tombs, which I needed to make the second Spirit rune word. but I was a little bit flimsy defensively, so Duriel was going to be a problem. Against normal enemies I stayed alive by dealing damage so quickly that they either died before reaching me or got stun locked into hit recovery forever, but Duriel could not be dealt with that way. Though I had a little strategy up my sleeve. Usually you want to always have the concentration aura active when using Blessed Hammer to boost the damage, but you can of course cast Blessed Hammer without concentration, and this is the reason why I put skill points into the Blessed Hammer synergies rather than the concentration aura when I respec, even though it led to slightly lower damage. Because sometimes it makes more sense to not use concentration, like using the Vigor aura for movement speed to stay at a healthy distance from Duriel. My DPS was a lot lower when running around this way compared to standing my ground and spamming, which led to a drawn out fight, but it was also a lot safer. We danced around each other in his pit for a couple of minutes, and then when I noticed that he was down to his last bit of health, I swapped back to concentration, drank a bunch of potions, and held down my Blessed Hammer button to finish the fight. Speaking of Duriel, I found this shell in the jungle. This unique body armor has good defensive stats, including the elusive cannot be frozen stat. Not that I was really unhappy with my stealth armor, it was great for my build, but now I was starting to see some very good non-runeward loot drop that I was not able to use, and it just felt bad to throw it all away. Maybe this was partly a skill issue, but I did notice an increase in the amount of times where I dropped uncomfortably low towards the end of Act 3. I dealt a lot of damage really quickly, but due to the nature of Blessed Hammer I had to constantly reposition myself, often very close to enemies, so a lot of the time enemies had time to deal damage to me as well. I pushed on for now, but I started to think about ways to shore up my weaknesses, even though it was a little bit tricky to brainstorm solutions with only 4 gear slots available, no charms and no mercenary. And Mephisto was no joke either. Again, I couldn't quite hit Mephisto with my hammers if I was standing at a range where I could comfortably dodge all of his spells, so I had to stand at a range where I could not dodge his spells. But with a little bit of hit and run tactics and disengaging to heal up when I dropped too low, I was able to defeat the Lord of Hatred. He did drop some pretty cool items, though nothing to sulk over. My defensive issues were still present, but Act 4 offered big open areas compared to the end of Act 3, so for the time being I could ignore my problems and push on a little bit further. After barely coming out on top against the Fasto the Armorer, and I mean barely, I once again smashed Mephisto's Soulstone at the Hellforge, filled with anticipation. I got an Io rune, which could be useful down the line, but it wasn't what I was looking for at the time. Something like a Soul rune to be able to make lore, or one of the runes I needed for my other spirit would have been much more useful to me right now. I continued into the Chaos Sanctuary, and after another extremely close call against the Infector of Souls, I was ready to take on Diablo. I walked up real close to stay within his Lightning Beam minimum range, and started spamming hammers. I was so focused on his Lightning Beam that I failed to consider that my fire resist wasn't that good either, so when Diablo used his Firestorm, I kind of just stood there, and I died. Somehow being overconfident going into this fight, I didn't have a safety portal set up, so I had to endure a jog of shame back through the River of Flame. Though once back at Diablo, he decided to finally use the Lightning Beam, and I was indeed able to dodge it by standing really close, granting me a window of opportunity to spam Blessed Hammer safely. I took Diablo down, noted that he dropped useless loot, and then moved on to the final act of Nightmare. Act 5 was a good opportunity to grind some additional levels before Hell, and except in some areas that spawned with a lot of ranged enemies, the maps and the monster types in this act really favored Blessed Hammer. I once again rescued the captured barbarians for the reward of Ral, Ort and Tal, and now I was just a Thal rune short of making the second spirit in that crown shield from earlier. The close calls were fast and frequent in Act 5. It felt like the Hammerdin required a bit more bulk to really shine, bulk that I could not easily acquire, but I pushed on instead of going back to the counters to farm more runes for upgrades. I had been secretly planning ahead already, foreseeing some big troubles when entering Hell, but I'll tell you more about that once we get there. The Ancients were too tough for me to fight head-on, but by leaving a field of hammers behind me and going for a walk around the summit, I kited them into submission. I entered the Throne of Destruction at level 51 with a stylish 666 life total. The predictable nature of Bale's minions let me spam hammers before they wave spawned, allowing me to start dealing heavy damage to them right away, and because of this I made quick work of all 5 waves. But when I took down Lister, Lister took me down with him due to his fire-enchanted explosion. Luckily for me, the trigger for opening the Bale fight is to defeat all 5 waves, not defeat all 5 waves and still be alive, so I took this Pyrrhic victory and moved on to Bale. Bale could deal a surprising amount of damage to me, which felt quite unusual for a paladin in Nightmare, but it was not quite enough to stop me from eventually defeating him and finishing the second difficulty. So about those problems that I foresaw, well, my survivability in Nightmare was not great, but in Hell it was awful. Negative resistances on a paladin, yikes. To be fair, the low 50s is a really low level to be entering Hell with, but my gear was also really subpar. The whole Runeward's only restriction aside, there was simply no excuse for still be wearing Nadir when going into Hell. So I carefully pushed through the first areas of the act, and archers and other ranged enemies were extremely dangerous to my character at this point. I eventually reached the Forgotten Tower, and it was time to grind out some runes again, and some levels, which was not very easy to do, again mostly because of those pesky archers. But eventually I realized that the key to fighting the archers was not to try and chase them down, but instead walk away from them and let them chase me, like with every other monster, and then hope that they would eventually walk into the hammers. Getting to the counters was doable, but it was grindy, and every mistake could be fatal. If I misjudged the situation and walked into a cluster of arrows or a nasty elite before realizing which stats it had, I could be eliminated in a fraction of a second. But the potential in her special rune drop was so big for this character that I saw no other option than to grind it out. On the second tower run I found a unique grand charm, Geed's Fortune, a bit of a low roll on the magic find, but still a very cool charm to have for any character, well except mine. As I wasn't allowed to wear such treasure, I had to settle for the lowly T-rune instead. Farming the Countess, or specifically getting to the Countess through all of the levels of the Forgotten Tower, was so difficult to do. I'm not saying that the Hammerdin isn't capable, it is certainly a very powerful build, but it has to be able to sustain some abuse while getting the hammers to connect, and with so little gear it was just tough to make it work for this character. And after getting blown up by an exploding elite from over 600 life, and then countless deaths from nasty archer packs, I decided to abandon the Hammerdin lifestyle. I used my Hell respec and went for a Holy Bolt and Fist of the Heavens build instead. Holy Bolt can only damage demons and undead, but its damage is quite good, and more importantly, it is a true ranged projectile attack, allowing for a much safer playstyle than the Hammerdin, and Fist of the Heavens provided great AoE against enemies that Holy Bolt could damage. Another boon with Holy Bolt is that its damage doesn't get boosted by any of the offensive auras. Well, that's not a good thing, objectively speaking, but it did allow me to run a defensive aura like Salvation up at all times without sacrificing damage, and as it so happens, the Forgotten Tower only has demons and undead enemies in it, so for this particular grind, this build was perfect. Now, I have played this build before, so I knew that it was a bit of a short-sighted decision that would cause me some problems later down the road, but for now it worked out great, and I could finally start knocking down the Countess consistently. I eventually found that missing Thull rune and made my second spirit rune word in the crown shield from earlier, a very nice damage boost, though at the price of a decent loss to resistances. My fire resistance in particular was really bad now, especially when I was not running with Salvation up. But other than that Thull rune, I actually didn't find that much. I didn't even find a single soul rune which I was looking for, though eventually I did manage to cube one from 3 end runes and used the soul together with an ore to make lore, +1 to all skills, lightning resistance, and a little bit of damage reduction, a very much needed helm upgrade. Goodbye Nadir, you will not be missed. Now I was kitted out in double spirit, lore and stealth, the classic budget power setup for casters, except this time instead of being the core of the gear loadout, it was the entire gear loadout. While I had not gotten any really good rune drops, I had gotten the main 2 that I was hunting for, and not only that, I had also gained over 10 levels in the tower, a perk of having a pretty bad tower map I suppose. So at level 65, with 2 new pieces of gear, I left the tower. Though when moving out into the fields again, a big weakness of the Holy Bolt spec began to show. Against enemies that are neither demons or undead, it does nothing. But to max out Holy Bolt and FOH, I only needed 40 skill points, and even after getting some nice utility skills, I still had a decent chunk of skill points left over, so I put those points into Conviction and Holy Shock to make the single target lightning damage from Fist of the Heavens stronger. It was not the strongest attack, but it was serviceable to fill the gaps in Holy Bolt's coverage, for now anyway. But do you know where Holy Bolt really excels? Against act bosses, because every act boss in Diablo 2 is a demon, and with quick, long-range projectiles dealing thousands of damage per hit, I was well equipped to take on Andariel, and similar to Nightmare Duriel, having the Vigor aura to swap to for a quick movement speed boost was really nice to have, and made kiting Andariel very easy, and with Holy Power I banished Andariel from the Catacombs and from existence. And while there are a lot of undead enemies in this place, there are also a lot of random beasts and monsters that are not bothered by Holy Bolt. But investing my excess skill points into a backup attack proved to have been a wise choice, because I was actually surprised how well I was able to handle enemies with Fist of the Heavens alone. Until I encountered the beetles, that is. They are naturally immune to lightning damage, and in the Magotlair there were no option to maneuver around them. My now decent level Conviction aura was technically able to break their immunity, so I could deal damage to them, but even with their immunity broken, they were still left with very high lightning resistance, so the damage was almost nothing. I actually found that it was faster to use Smite together with my old steel sword to trigger open wounds on them and then slowly bleed them out. Though while it was faster than throwing lightning at them, it was still very slow, so the Magotlair was a real grind. But to look on the bright side, it was still pretty safe, since Smite stuns enemies and the narrow tunnels made sure I could not get swarmed. The Clawviper Temple was also a bit tricky, but compared to the beetles, every other enemy I had to fight felt like a gift. The snakes could charge me for big damage, but by kiting them through the corridors it was rather safe, as long as I didn't get overconfident and rush too far ahead, though level 2 was a bit tricky because there was simply no room to retreat backwards. But I narrowly managed to run past Fangskin and then didn't get too many other enemies in the area, and with that little bit of space to move around in, I could take the last few snakes down and secure the amulet. And after those two areas, the act was thankfully mostly demons and undead after this point. The mummies in the tombs, who are magic immune, could still be taken down with Holy Bolt, even though that deals magic damage. I guess the holy anti-undead nature of the spell has higher priority than resistances. I kited Duriel around this tiny pit with Vigor and Holy Bolt. The act bosses were not the main issue for this character, but rather questing through tricky areas with non-demon and non-undead monsters. When Duriel was down to his last bit of life, I stood my ground and spammed my spell, and that worked out perfectly fine. The fight against Duriel in Hell lasted less than a minute. Holy Bolt really was an incredibly powerful spell against enemies that it worked on. The jungle offered some non-demon, non-undead beasts which I had to slowly grind down with FOH or simply skip, but also plenty of small, swarming demons, the dream scenario for a Fist of the Heavens enjoyer. Though in the Korast areas there were plenty more enemies that I couldn't Holy Bolt, but there was not really a compelling reason for me to grind them down, so as I progressed deeper into Hell I started skipping more and more of the enemies that I couldn't take down with Holy Bolt. Trav? That's all I wrote in the script. I guess the fight was easy since they are demons and like to group up. Let's move on. The scariest part of Act 3 were the dolls. With their fast movement speed and on-death explosions, combined with my high damage output, it was easy to get into situations where they ran up close to me before I had time to react, and then I blasted them with Holy Bolt at point-blank range, causing me to take heavy explosion damage. But with a little bit of careful play and a little bit of luck, I managed to stay alive. Mephisto himself was, much like the other act bosses, not the biggest problem of the act. I even got him stuck on a ledge for a while for some free damage, but even when he had the ability to fight back, he simply didn't stand a chance. And finally some noteworthy loot again. Mephisto dropped a unique Tyrant Club. Demon Limb is a decent fighter weapon in its own right, but what makes it interesting is the level 23 enchant charges. I was not in need of attack rating, a melee bonk weapon, or unique items in general, but I said that it was a noteworthy drop, not a useful one. The outdoor areas can spawn with a variety of monster types. I got a decent amount that I had to whittle down with lightning, but with big open areas it was alright, just a bit time consuming. Even Isuel, who surprisingly is not a demon, had to be struck by thunder. While the respec from Blessed Hammer still felt questionable at times, I ultimately think it was the right call, because I was pretty weak defensively, which is hard to believe considering I was a paladin, I know. My rune words were all solid, but I was really feeling the lack of supporting stats from the rest of my gear slots. But as I entered the later parts of the act, Holy Bolt had its moment to shine again, as I easily blasted through hordes of demons and undead in the River of Flame. I still had to be very mindful about enemy projectiles or getting swarmed, but the high damage output of Holy Bolt carried me forward at a rapid pace. I reached the Hellforge, another chance at a good rune to unlock some new rune word options, and this time I got a Lem rune. This is easily a top 3 rune for me from the Hellforge, as it can be used to create treachery. An armor rune word with +2 to assassin skills, but this has some great stats for any character, with the main ones being the big attack speed boost and a chance to cast Fade when hit, which boosts your physical and elemental resistances. A great armor for both melee characters. fighters and mercenaries. But as neither of those apply to the run right now, with me not being a melee fighter and not using a mercenary, the LEM was not as great for this run as it would have been for most. It will end up coming into play later on, but at the time I just put it in my stash. Going into the Chaos Sanctuary, the run took a turn for the better. For once, one of my challenge run characters was actually happy to be here, because the Chaos Sanctuary is basically the perfect area for the Holy Bolt Paladin. 100% of the enemies that can spawn here are demons or undead, and it has a very kiteable terrain, so I made quick work of the final area of Act 4. Against Diablo, I decided to run up close to him to try and dodge his lightning again, and in contrast to Nightmare, my resistances were actually pretty alright now with the Salvation aura up, even though my fire resist was still lacking behind. I had lots of potions stacked up though, since most of the time a few seconds with the Redemption aura after a fight was enough to top me up, so the potions kept on just stacking up in my inventory, and with how quickly I blasted through Diablo's health bar with Holy Bolt, it turned out that I didn't need to worry too much about it, and I defeated the Lord of Terror for the final time. Going into the final act, I was up against one last long-ass grind. Despite the enemies here looking very demonic, there are actually very few demons in the first several parts of this act. The odd undead skeleton or imp was easy to deal with, but against the majority of the enemies that spawned here, I had to grind them down with lightning. And while Salvation made my resistances look decent, when using Fist of the Heavens I was incentivized to use Conviction instead to lower enemy resistances, and without Salvation my resistances were looking really bad, and with such grindy fights and the catapults continuously firing for extra elemental damage, it was increasingly difficult to avoid taking damage. And to help with this problem, it was finally time to make another rune word. I went back to my stash and grabbed the Lem rune from the Hellforge and made that treachery armor. I was not intending on becoming a melee brawler all of a sudden, but thinking about it, that Fade proc alone might be enough to justify this armor. I didn't want to give up on the powerful stats from my stealth armor, but I carried the treachery armor with me in my inventory as a pre-buff armor, and by standing in the burning fires on the ground outside of town, I could trigger the buff safely before heading into battle. It was a little bit painful to trigger Fade this way with only a 5% chance to trigger and very low fire resistance, but it was reliable and controllable. A level 15 Fade boosted my elemental resistances by 60, my physical resistances by 15, as well as reducing curse duration significantly, a great catch-all defensive boost. And at that level, Fade lasted almost 5 minutes too, which was very handy for helping me keep the buff up even without using Treachery as my main armor. And after triggering the boost, I could run back to my TP and continue my adventure for a few minutes before having to worry about it again. Though, to be honest, this sounded great on paper, but in reality, even with a 5-minute timer, it was a bit tedious, so pretty soon I reserved the Treachery pre-buff for use only when I encountered some extra nasty enemies instead of trying to keep it up all of the time. And here's something cool that I discovered on this run. Look at this door. I cast 3 Fist of the Heavens on it, leaving it at around 60 life remaining, and when I switched to Conviction, 2 more hits were enough to take the rest of the door down. And in contrast to most other lightning damage spells, FOH actually has a very tight damage range with lightning, so it seems to me that you can lower the lightning resistance of a door with Conviction, despite the negative aura effect not showing up under it. Maybe that'll be useful knowledge someday. I reached the area at Summit, and I knew that this would be a tough obstacle to tackle. 3 strong warriors, all immune to Holy Bolt. I pre-buffed myself with Treachery outside of town to give myself the best chance possible. I went back to the summit and summoned the Ancients. The fight started off alright, with me kiting them in a loop around the area with Fist of the Heavens, but right when things were starting to look decent, extra fast Talik connected with his whirlwind once to drain my life pool, and before I could drink a rejuve, he hit me again and killed me. The second attempt, Talik and Korlik were cursed, and this can be a death sentence, but I decided to give it an honest go anyway, and this time none of them were extra fast, which actually meant that I could kite them completely safely with a great range of FOH and the speed boost from Vigor. I slowly wore them down while going around the summit, taking down first Korlik and then shortly after Talik, and during this I barely got hit, and at this point I had already taken out the victory in advance, but then Madak. Madak is always lightning immune in Hell. Much like the Beatles from Act 2, Conviction could break his immunity, but he was left with lots of lightning resistance, so my attacks barely tickled him. And here I realized that I had messed up. I had planned to take him on using the Smite plus Open Wounds tactics, but I had forgotten to bring the Steel Sword into the fight. My cube was filled with nothing but potions, and my weapon switch was empty, so I had no choice but to grind him down with FOH alone. But then I stumbled into a very lucky situation. Madoc got stuck in a place where his axes got eaten by a stone pillar, but since FOH is not a projectile but a godly beam from the heavens, it hit Madoc when he couldn't hit me. A completely one-sided situation. This made things look great again, but soon another problem. I completely ran out of mana potions. Was I really going to use my remaining rejuves for mana only? No, I needed those in the Worldstone Keep. But in this roller coaster of a fight, I found that I had one unspent skill point, and in the middle of battle I invested that into meditation for a massive boost to mana regen. Now I still needed conviction to actually damage Madoc with FOH, but then as soon as I ran out of mana, I swapped to meditation and waited for a few seconds for my mana pool to fill back up, rinse and repeat. Fighting like this was a pain, and Madoc alone took the Ancients fight from a 4-minute encounter to over 16 minutes. But with meditation and the lucky situation with the pillar, this fight was won long before it ended. It just took a while for the victory to materialize, and I was happy to take the W, regardless of how it came to be. The Worldstone Keep was perfectly fine as far as what types of enemies spawned. I did get a few souls, which are usually a big problem, but with my long-range Holy Bolt, it was for once me who was sniping the souls from the edge of the screen instead of the other way around. And I thoroughly enjoyed this chance for revenge for all of my heroes they have killed in the past. Then I was up against the Throne Room waves and Bale's minions, and all 5 waves consist purely of demons or undead, and that together with the predictable spawn locations made them very easy to defeat with holy magic from a safe range. And then Bale. In hell, Bale is extremely tanky, and his annoying spells deal decent damage and can screw with your positioning. I once again utilized my long-ranged advantage. Bale could attack me back even from the edge of my screen, but not with all attacks, and I found it quite funny how he kept casting his mana burn spell at me from that range even though the attack itself doesn't reach that far. But at the end of the day, Bale is a demon, and this fight was merely a formality, and within a couple of minutes I defeated the Lord of Destruction and claimed my victory. Diablo 2 beaten while wearing only 4 pieces of gear, using no charms and no mercenary. Are rune words a little too good, or is it perhaps the Paladin who is a bit OP? Well, yes. Thanks again to Boot.dev for sponsoring the video. Links in the description and the pinned comment if you wanna check it out, or scan the QR code on screen. Thanks for watching, and a special shout out to all my supporters on YouTube and Twitch. You are like a spirit runeword in a paladin shield with 45 to all resistances. Absolutely awesome.
However, you cannot copy monster cards unless you have a puppet. If you're familiar with this card from the physical card game, it seems like a stark difference from what its stats are in real life, as its TCG version is a light monster which is level 1 and has 0 attack and defense. Copycat is a key example of how undefined Yu-Gi-Oh was, for many reasons. It's a monster card, yet in the anime, every time you play it, it's activated like a spell.
How often does Yugi actually cheat?
Yugi cheats a lot, like a whole lot, like here, or here, or here, or here. At this point, it's practically a meme. Yugi has cheated so much, he's gained a reputation for pulling off some of the most ridiculous rule-breaking plays. But the truth is, Yugi bends rules in almost every arc, and yes, even in movies. So today, I wanted to make the most complete breakdown ever made. Every illegal move, every contradiction, and even clearing up a few things that look like cheating, but actually aren't. So let's find out. Does Yugi really deserve the King of Games title, or is he actually the King of Cheats? We need to lay a few ground rules about what counts as a cheat. You can pause if you want to read them. The most important thing is that some of these are a bit subjective, so if you disagree, make sure to let me know in the comments. But starting off with Duelist Kingdom, home to some of the most prolific cases of Yugi cheating, we'll begin with Yugi versus Weevil. I'll also use this duel to lay out some of the weird plays that Yugi makes that aren't actually cheats. Starting off strong, just 2 turns into the duel, Yugi draws a card during Weevil's draw phase, which, you know, you aren't allowed to do. Weevil first attacks Dark Magician with his basic insect, but Yugi activates Mirror Force, and then Weevil's monsters get destroyed. Seemingly out of nowhere, Weevil loses 1445 life points. This might seem like a cheat, but in Duelist Kingdom, whenever a monster is destroyed by effect, the owner of that monster loses a portion of those monsters' attack and are destroyed. That being said, the amount lost is never consistent, as in this duel, Weevil should have lost 2035 life points, not 1445, but given that in this case it doesn't help Yugi, the way life points are taken away based on card destruction is also too arbitrary for me to definitively say if Yugi's cheating, so we won't count this as one. Another cheat that people consider one is Yugi activating Burning Land, which he uses to destroy the field. An aspect of Duelist Duelist Kingdom that not a lot of people realize is that a lot of the rules basically come down to how good at improv you are when coming up with card effects. So if something sounds reasonable enough, you can do anything. Akin to a game of D&D, but just like D&D, if Yugi's explanation for an effect is just too far out of the bounds of reality, I'm going to count it as a cheat. So in this case, Burning Land is as reasonable of an explanation you can give in destroying a field spell. Weevil attacks Gaia with Great Moth, and in response, Yugi activates Polymerization from his hand during Weevil's turn to fusion summon Gaia the Dragon Champion. So this is a tricky one, because on the one hand, spells are treated as quick play spells in Duelist Kingdom. There are many cases of this happening, so we know that this isn't a rule break. What's less justifiable is that Yugi activates Polymerization from his hand during Weevil's turn, which isn't allowed. I couldn't find any examples of other spells being activated from the hand, but the best evidence I could of this being a rule break is that Yugi actually summons Dark Sage, which has the effect of letting Yugi activate one spell from their hand during your opponent's turn, which implies that you couldn't normally. So we'll count this as a cheat. Yugi activates Makyu the Magical Mist, which according to Yugi,
that's right, Magical Mist washes the field clean.
Which was important as Great Moth continually weakened Yugi's monster through the air. Okay, sure, I can see this working under the current applications of Great Moth's poisonous scales. Yugi also attempts to argue that Makyu the Magical Mist boosts Summon Skull attack, due to it creating a thunderstorm, and the fact that Summon Skull has an electrical attack. This one is also fine, because weirdly enough, Summon Skull does attack with electricity. Moving on to Yugi's duel against Mako, on Mako's turn, he declares an attack on Yugi's Giant Soldier of Stone in defense position, and Yugi changes Giant Soldier of Stone's defense position to attack position, which counts as a cheat because you can't change your monster's position during your opponent's turn. And the next cheat is a controversial one. After Yugi changes Giant Soldier of Stone to attack position, this card attacks his spell card, Full Moon, to cause the tide to reverse and a water to reverse, leaving Mako's monsters all exposed from the water, which in turn makes them lose attack due to them being short. And so Yugi's justification of this is,
Transfiguration by Ordinance Divine.
I'm actually going to count this as a cheat, and here's why. The main reasoning for this is when Yugi first activates Full Moon, the tide doesn't change at all. So on the flip side, if Yugi destroys Full Moon, there should also be no change in the tide. Next up is Yugi's duel against Ghost Kaiba. Yugi uses Spellbinding Circle on Kaiba's Blue Eyes, which causes it to lose 700 attack and prevents it from attacking or changing its battle position. Nowhere on the card does it state that the monster loses 700 attack, and so normally I would count this as a cheat. But because the anime consistently shows Spellbinding Circle reducing a monster's attack by 700 every time Yugi uses it, I'm not going to count this one. Yugi uses Mystical Elf to boost Blue Eyes' attack by 1100, but Mystical Elf is a normal monster, and Yugi's justification for this is pretty weak. So this one is definitely a stretch, and I'm going to count it as a cheat. An honorable mention is Kaiba hacking Blue Eyes, so it loses attack and eventually blows itself up through plot armor. Now, I'm not going to count this as Yugi cheating, because the entire effect is caused by Kaiba interfering with the duel, not anything Yugi does. Again, this is another controversial one. This duel takes the cake for quite possibly the biggest Duelist Kingdom nonsense. Yugi uses Spellbinding Circle to force Reaper of the Cards to attack one of Yugi's cards, which contradicts every other use of Spellbinding Circle. As I mentioned before, the anime always is shown to debuff the monster by 700 attack, and also prevented the affected monster from attacking. So that's a cheat for Yugi for just making up an effect on the spot. Panic swarms the Field of Darkness, which prevents Yugi from seeing what cards are being played, so Yugi uses Sword of Revealing Light to brighten the field. This one makes a lot of sense as it's in the name, so I don't mind it. What I can't let slide is Yugi's next move. He uses Swords of Revealing Light to prevent Panic from attacking for 3 turns, and then uses Catapult Turtle to sacrifice Gaia the Dragon Champion to launch an attack on a flotation ring of Castle of Dark Illusions. And I'm going to count this as 4 separate points of cheating. The first is when Catapult Turtle sacrifices Gaia the Dragon Champion. It boosts its attack by 600, which obviously Catapult Turtle doesn't do. And Yugi doesn't even bother giving it an explanation for, and Catapult Turtle never does this again in the anime, so I'm counting this one as a cheat. The second one comes from how after Gaia's been fired at the castle, the only part of the castle that is damaged is the flotation ring on it, and absolutely nothing else. This makes no physical or logical sense, because for the flotation ring to be damaged means that the shield surrounding the monsters, the rest of the castle, or even the monsters themselves didn't get damaged, but only the flotation ring, which, might I add, the shield is what caused the monsters to be trapped under the castle, so we know the shield could be interacted with. The third cheat is Yugi's justification for why the Castle of Dark Illusions is still floating.
The only thing holding up your castle are the Swords of Revealing Light. And when this turn ends, each and every sword will vanish.
Which makes absolutely no sense, because if monsters are locked inside the swords, then how did the flotation ring fall before the swords expired? And for the fourth cheat, Swords of Revealing Light disappeared after 2 of Panic's turns, where it should have been for free. Even within the framework of Duelist Kingdom D&D rules, the reasoning for Yugi's attack with Catapult Turtle makes no sense, and it's just too egregious to let go. Also, what the hell is Flotation Ring? I'm pretty confident that this is just a concept Yugi made up to justify this ass-pull of a win. By the way, if you're currently enjoying the video, why not subscribe to the channel? It helps me a lot and lets me know this is the kind of content that you want to watch. Next up is Seto's rematch against Yugi. Yugi activates Living Arrow along with Polymerization to fuse Mammoth Graveyard to Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, causing a decrease in attack of Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon at the end of each of Yugi's end phases. So the actual act of Yugi using Polymerization to fuse Blue Eyes to Mammoth Graveyard is actually fine, as in Duelist Kingdom you could use Polymerization on any 2 cards to create a new fusion. And while I would have been okay with this, as the actual logic behind fusing Pallid Bones to Blue Eyes works, what works less is Yugi's actual justification he gives. Except that Mammoth Graveyard is neither dark or a zombie, it's a nerf dinosaur. And this is all based off the anime card, so because Yugi got both the type and attribute wrong here, I'm counting this as a cheat. I'm giving another cheat for Yugi using Living Arrow as well, because every time it's used, Yugi's reasoning is way too vague and changes every time. Here, it allows him to use Polymerization on an opponent's monster. The next time, it lets Yugi use one of Pegasus' spell cards after it had already been resolved. The next, it reflected Bandit Keith's spell card back to his monster. So if how its usage does not line up at all with the card's effect, and how Yugi doesn't even justify how this works, I'm counting this as an additional cheat. In Yugi's duel against Mai, he doesn't actually cheat, and every single reasoning he gives is pretty solid. Here, Yugi uses Catapult Turtle to destroy Mai's Mirror Wall, where even if Mirror Wall is a trap, Yugi's justification fits and makes sense. Mai's Shadow of Eyes forces Yugi's monsters to attack her, and Yugi plays Mystical Elf, which ignores Mai's spell, as Shadow of Eyes only works on female monsters, which again, makes sense here. For Yugi versus Joey's duel, Yugi only gets 1 cheat in this duel. Joey attacks with Thousand Dragon, but in response, Yugi activates Maki the Magical Mist, which blocks Thousand Dragon's attack by extinguishing the flames through the rainwater. It's a fishy explanation because the rainwater is shown only to affect outside of the castle, not the inside, but I can see how rainwater can stop the attack of a fire-breathing dragon. Joey manages to affect Time Wizard's effect against Yugi, causing it to age the field, with this effect working on Dark Magician. But then we see that it never actually ended up working as intended, as now Dark Magician turns into another monster, the Dark Sage. This is much of an ass pull as you can get, and it's even worse when you consider Yugi gave this card to Joey. But the idea of a wizard with a millennial worth of knowledge, unfortunately for Joey, is an explanation that makes sense. Thank God. Moving on to our final duel in Duelist Kingdom, we have to evaluate in this arc is Yugi versus Pegasus. Like before, Yugi activates Living Arrow with a different effect from its written text, and the explanation doesn't work, so that's an extra count to the score. The only other potential cheat is the sequence of events where Yugi activates Multiply and Kuriboh to create an infinite number of them, causing Thousand Eyes Restrict to blow up, which all makes sense. We're finally off of the massive rules that Duelist Kingdom brings, and we can enter the more concrete defined rules of Battle City, to a certain point. With this being said, it means that we're now judging Yugi's gameplay based off Battle City rules, so that means no more headaches of wondering what a Flotation Ring is, or why Maki has a different effect every time it appears on screen. We'll start off Battle City with the very first duel of the entire arc, being Yugi versus Seeker. Yugi goes through most of the duel without cheating, but for some incredibly bizarre reason, it seems like Duelist Kingdom shenanigans are still in store, as Yugi makes up an effect where Alpha the Magnet Warrior gains 200 attack because of Summon Skull's electricity, boosting Alpha. The crazy thing though is that Yugi didn't even need to cheat here, because well, if Yugi wasn't a bum of a duelist and used a monster with the lowest attack to attack a defense position monster, he had enough attack to wipe out the Seeker anyways. So this is obviously a cheat, as Duelist Kingdom rules are off the table in Battle City, so any attempt at trying to logic your way through a random effect appearing doesn't work. The next duel is Yugi versus Arcana. Arcana activates Dark Magic Curtain to special summon a Dark Magician from his deck during his main phase, then proceeds to attack Yugi during his battle phase. Somehow, even after Dark Magic Curtain's resolution and an entire new phase change, Yugi for whatever reason is able to just activate his opponent's cards as his own to special summon Dark Magician Girl, which is a pretty clear violation of the rules. This move gives Yugi 2 cheats. For the first one, you can't just use the opponent's spell to special summon your own monster, and the second is that Dark Dark Magic Curtain's card effect states that you can special summon Dark Magician, not just any spellcaster. So Yugi wasn't allowed to special summon the Dark Magician girl here. The third cheat is when Arcane activates Ectoplasm, a card which lets the turn player choose 2 types of monsters to be converted into ectoplasm, whatever that means. An opponent loses life points equal to the attributed monster's attack. Arcane attributes 2 monsters, so the first type, Fiend, which does inflict damage to Yugi, but then Arcana sacrifices his Dark Magician to deal damage to Yugi, which should have caused Yugi to lose the duel. But for whatever reason, Yugi's Dark Magician absorbs the damage which Yugi should have taken, which is just not an effect in the card. In Yugi's duel against Strings, we get a record number of times that Yugi cheats in a single game. Yugi says that Buster Blader gains 500 attack for each dragon-type monster in the grave. However, he also applies it to Slifer the Sky Dragon. But Slifer the Sky Dragon, despite its name, isn't a dragon type, it's a divine beast. Yugi puts Kuriboh in defense position, which should have triggered Slifer's effect to decrease Kuriboh's attack by 2000 and cause it to get destroyed. But Yugi justifies this by saying as Nightmare Steel Cage prevents attacks, it prevents Slifer's second math effect from activating. This is wrong. Nightmare Steel Cage only stops attacks, not any effects that destroy monsters. Probably the most egregious is Yugi activating Magic Cylinder and Spellbinding Circle on Slifer the Sky Dragon, which counts as 2 cheats here. Spellbinding Circle shouldn't work on Slifer, as we've seen Mirror Force not working on Obelisk when it attacks.
Sorry to disappoint you, but Mirror Force will reflect Obelisk's attack right back at you.
I'm afraid that your weak trap card won't work.
Magic Cylinder negates and redirects Slifer's attack. While you could make an argument that this card doesn't affect the gods directly and affects their attacks, this again is inconsistent with the previous examples of traps affecting the gods. Yugi uses Brain Control.
Let's pause. And let's get something to eat to myself. Found some food. Was pretty easy. Not the thing that I thought it would be. But that's fine. Let's just make sure enjoy it as much as possible. Well, looks like there were mushrooms inside. Mushrooms give me the ick. Or mushrooms are icky, I guess. For me.
Take control of Revival Jam, which is fine, but here Yugi cheats in two ways. First is that Slifer's effect gets procced when Revival Jam is on Yugi's field, but that isn't how Brain Control works. It simply just swaps the side of the field Revival Jam is on. It doesn't count as a summon, so Slifer's effect shouldn't have worked here. The second is that even if Slifer's effect does proc after Revival Jam gets destroyed, this card gets sent to Marik's grave, and when it hits the grave, Revival Jam's effect causes it to get special summoned back to Marik's field, not Yugi's. As Brain Control doesn't make you become the owner for the rest of the game. In Yugi's duel against Loomis and Umbra, he cheats a total of 4 times. Yugi activates Card Destruction, sending Beast of Guilford to the graveyard, which is fine. Its effect allows it to equip itself to a monster and lower that monster's attack by 500. What isn't fine is that Yugi never mentions this effect at all. He only reveals it after Blue Eyes attacks, which is obviously just cheating. You can't just hide an activated effect and reveal it whenever it's convenient for you. Yugi summons Valkyrie and a Magnet Warrior by tributing the 3 Magnet Warriors, but the cheat comes from where Mask of Restrict is on the field, which doesn't let either player tribute summon monsters. This one is pretty egregious, as clearly on the Valkyrie and a Magnet Warrior card, it specifically uses the word tribute. Loomis and Umbra even tried to call Yugi out on this, but he tries to justify it by saying,
"That card only prevents us from sacrificing. But that's not the only way to summon powerful monsters, Umbra."
Which is just a cop-out, as it doesn't matter what you want to call it, Valkyrion's card effect states directly that you will be tributing monsters. Yugi uses Diffusion on Valkyrie and a Magnet Warrior, but it's clearly not fusion, it's an effect monster in the anime, so this combo shouldn't have worked. Another cheat is that Yugi activates Diffusion to summon the Magnet Warriors back, but they should have returned to Yugi's field, not Umbra's, which is crucial as Kaiba then used 3 tributes to summon Obelisk, giving them the win here. Up next is Yugi's duel against Joey, possessed by Marik. Yugi uses Dispel to negate the effects of Graceful Dice, but this isn't how Dispel works. Dispel doesn't negate, it only destroys. So in this case, Yugi only would have destroyed Graceful Dice, but he wouldn't have been able to stop the effect of Graceful Dice from working. The second cheat is that the end result of the duel should have been a loss, not a draw, as Yugi's life points reach 0 first, and after this happens, the duel ends. And Joey wouldn't have been able to equalize his life points for them to reach 0 as well. In Yugi's duel against Kaiba in the Colosseum, we see Kaiba summon Obelisk, and then Slifer's second math effect activates, causing it to lose 2000 attack. This shouldn't have worked, as literally in the same duel, Obelisk's attack destruction effect doesn't work on Slifer, which is inconsistent with what we see here. Either Slifer's effect doesn't work on Obelisk, or Obelisk would have been able to destroy Slifer in this case. And there's no justification for why Slifer's effect works on Obelisk, but Obelisk's effect doesn't work back. So I'm going to count this as a cheat. Kaiba activates Flute of Summoning Dragon, and again Yugi gets to use his opponent's card out of nowhere, and uses it to summon Red Eyes Black Dragon, which obviously isn't allowed.
Where did that come from? If you recall, you used your Flute of Summoning Dragon to summon your Blue Eyes to the field.
Ooh.
But you may have forgotten that your flute works on my hand as well.
You can't use your opponent's card to summon your own monsters. Another thing to note is that during this duel, Kaiba activates Spell Sanctuary, a card which lets spells get activated during the opponent's turn, which implied that before, any time a spell is used during your opponent's turn, it was illegal. I've decided to assume that all spells being spell speed 4 was legal, mainly due to the overwhelming number of times this has been confirmed. And then for finale in Battle City, I only managed to spot 2 cheats. Yugi sets a card without looking at it in the Spell and Trap zone, and I'm counting this as a cheat, because if it was a monster card, this would have counted as him misrepresenting what he had on the field. Yugi uses Ragnarok to banish his entire deck to destroy Winged Dragon of Ra, which again, destruction effects don't work on the gods, and this effect shouldn't have been able to destroy Ra. And in the case that you think Ragnarok does anything special, in the original show, Yugi explicitly says that Ragnarok destroys Ra. So this is a cheat. In the entirety of Virtual World Arc, I could only find one single instance of cheating in the entirety of Virtual World, and that's an attack duel against the Big Five, where Yugi summons Dark Flare Knight with Polymerization and attacks the same turn it's summoned. In the anime during Battle City, fusion monsters couldn't attack on the same turn they were summoned, and so Yugi attacking with Dark Flare Knight was illegal. You could argue that as this wasn't in Battle City and in a separate arc, the fusion summoning restriction might have been taken off, and that maybe this rule didn't apply to Virtual World, except that we see Seto Kaiba using Quick Attack against Noah Kaiba, a card which lets fusion monsters attack on the same turn they are summoned.
Thanks to my Quick Attack magic card, I can attack right now.
Implying that any cases of this happening without this card broke the rules. Moving on to the Waking the Dragons arc, we'll start with Yugi's duel against Raphael. Yugi first special summons Kuriboh Babylon by using Kuriboh as effect to banish the 5 Kuriboh brothers from the field. Yugi then later activates Kuriboh Babylon's effect to remove it from play to special summon back the 5 Kuriboh brothers. Later, Yugi then again activates Kuriboh's effect to summon Kuriboh Babylon from the banish zone, but this actually was a case of Yugi cheating. Kuriboh's effect only special summons Kuriboh Babylon from the deck, hand, or graveyard, not the banish zone. The only way this combo would have worked is if he runs another copy of Kuriboh Babylon in his deck, but this seems pretty unlikely, so it's a case of Yugi cheating. Dark Magician Girl the Dragon Knight gets destroyed because Yugi activates Seal of Orichalcos, but there's an effect that lets it return to the field after it gets destroyed, and so Yugi would have had an empty field after this. In Yugi's duel against the fake Yugi, he states that Divine Wind's effect inflicts any damage the opponent's monster's effect would inflict damage to you, doubled back to the opponent, but this is a flat out lie. It instead reflects any damage that the player would have taken onto the opponent plus 500. This duel is probably one of the most insane duels in the anime, where so many times Yugi just objectively breaks the rules, and this isn't even in Duelist Kingdom. Yugi activates Relay Soul, a card which lets him special summon one monster from his hand, but you lose the duel if the special summon monster is destroyed. The cheating comes from when he activated it. His life points reach 0 before the activation of this card, and as Relay Soul is activated after his life points reach 0, he would have lost the duel at that point, and wouldn't have been able to play any cards past this point. Just bear with me for this next combo, because it's incredibly convoluted, where I think Yugi cheats in almost every conceivable way here. Legendary Knight Critias attacks Divine Serpent Ge, but then Yugi activates the effect of Critias, letting it absorb the effect of Attack Guidance Barrier from his hand. Now Yugi can choose another monster on the field, and whenever Critias attacks or is attacked this turn, the attack will be directed to the chosen monster, and so Yugi chooses Hermos. And Hermos's effect is that whenever it gets attacked, its attack stat gets tripled, and then it gets reflected back to Critias. But since Critias has just been attacked, its absorbed effect activates again, reflecting it back to Hermos, and again Hermos's effect activates, causing its attack to be tripled. This causes an infinite loop, where Hermos's attack reaches infinity. Tamias then activates effect, absorbing Critias and Hermos to special summon a Knight of Destiny, letting it absorb the combined attack of the 3 knights and attack and destroy Divine Serpent Ge. And within this entire sequence of events, I found a total of 5 cheats. The first is that Critias absorbs a card's effect from his hand, which he uses on Attack Guidance Armor. However, if we look at Attack Guidance Armor's effect, this shouldn't have worked, as it only works when an opponent's monster declares an attack, not when your monster attacks the opponent's. The second is that Attack Guidance Armor also requires a defense position monster you control, and so Critias wouldn't have been able to redirect the attack to Hermos. The third cheat is that obviously, your opponent cannot reach infinite attack points by stacking them over and over, as technically Yugi could have just let the attack stack continuously for a long time, but it always would have been a value substantially lower than infinity. Fourth cheat is how Hermos is even able to reflect the attack of Critias back in the first place. Yugi sends the 3 Magnet Warriors to the grave as part of Hermos's effect, but there isn't anything that explains how or what these cards are related to in Hermos's attack deflection, and seems to imply that it's due to them being magnets, which is a whole nother can of worms I don't want to deal with. The fifth and final cheat of this combo is that Yugi claims
Divine Serpent's strength may be infinite, but that's still not enough. For now, there's a force beyond infinity.
This just mathematically makes no sense to even attempt to claim, and is just untrue. For the only cheat in the Grand Championship arc, when Yugi activates Monster Reincarnation, he doesn't actually return Dark Magician to his deck. And for the final and last duel of the original series, we have Yugi's duel against the Pharaoh. For this, we will count both Atem and Yugi cheating as going towards the final count. The first cheat that will count is Yugi Moto using Ground Erosion on Obelisk, which Yugi tries to justify justify by saying that the trap affects the monster zone Obelisk is in, not Obelisk itself, which is extremely flimsy reasoning, and Obelisk should still be unaffected by this trap. The Pharaoh uses the effect of Slifer to reduce the effect of each of Yugi's Magnet Warriors after they all get summoned, but Yugi counters with Magnet Force, which he claimed to redirect Slifer's attack back to the Free Gods. This again is a cheat, as the Pharaoh states in this duel,
Traps don't work on Obelisk.
and so Magnet Force shouldn't have been able to redirect Slifer's effect. It also contradicts Yugi's earlier assertion that the second math ability of Slifer is an attack, not an effect, which Magnet Force implies. As his card directly states, if it's targeted by an effect. Magnet Force is also treated as a continuous trap, even though it's a normal trap, and stays on the field for longer than the turn, which again is a cheat. Slifer gets summoned through the effect of Summoning Clock, a card which lets him special summon monsters from your hand equal to the number of turn counters. This is all fine and well, but as we know if the gods are special summoned, then they are sent to the grave at the end of the turn, but this never happens in a duel. Yugi Moto activates Mirage Ruler, a card which returns all monsters destroyed this turn back to the field, and he returns Valkyrion and Silent Swordsman back to the field. Throughout the duel, Silent Swordsman has been gaining attack during each of Yugi's standby phases, so as Silent Swordsman was removed from the field, it would no longer have its boosted attack, and once Yugi summoned it again, it should have had 1000 attack again. Atem activates Monster Reborn during the battle phase, but Battle City rules no longer apply, and so the Pharaoh shouldn't have been able to activate a spell as a quick play. Yugi Moto activates Spell Textbook, which lets him discard his entire hand to draw one card into Card of Sanctity. The issue is specifically with Spell Textbook, as its effect states that you can discard all the cards in your hand, but given that Yugi has no cards in his hand, he cannot satisfy the requirements to activate it, and so this was an illegal move. Spell Textbook on a wiki does have the if any clause, which would make it a legal play. If you take the literal Japanese translation of the card, it makes no mention of the if any. That is in the last time we see Yugi duel in the anime, as in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX he duels against Jaden, where he goes through most of the duel without cheating, except for one especially blatant combo. Jaden activates the card Code Change, which lets him change a type in a card effect to be any type of his choosing, which in this case was Hero's Guild, and then Yugi responds by playing Mystical Ref Panel, which I'll be giving 3 docs for. The first is that Yugi wasn't even able to activate Mystical Ref Panel, as the card text of Mystical Ref Panel requires a target of Code Change to be able to be applied to another appropriate target. So in this case, Yugi would have needed to swap Code Change's target to instead be card on the field other than Hero's Guild, which now run on. So the conditions to activate Mystical Ref Panel weren't satisfied in the first place. The second is that Yugi uses Mystical Ref Panel like a continuous trap card, and it stays on the field for the rest of the game. But Mystical Ref Panel is a normal trap, and should have been sent to the grave after Yugi activated it. And even on a card that he did end up using Code Change on, Yugi still used it wrong, as Dark Renewal's Japanese effect is this, and makes no mention of the type of monster not special summoned from the grave being Spellcaster. And if we look at the TCG version, its effect specifically mentions a Dark Spellcaster, which Yugi still cannot summon Slifer with, as even if Yugi used Code Change on Dark Renewal, he could then only summon a Dark Divine Beast monster, not a Divine Beast monster. Another cheat I found in this duel is when Impact Flip sends Beast of Guilford from the deck to the grave, and then during Yugi's turn his Dark Magician attacks Elemental Hero Blade Edge, and only when Jaden attacks into Dark Magician does Guilford's effect get shown. Again, like before, Yugi's hiding knowledge from Jaden until the last possible moment, so this counts as a cheat. Moving on to the big screen, we'll start with Pyramid of Light, where Yugi gets attacked and drops all his cards. You can see for a brief moment that he loses 2 copies of the Winged Dragon of Ra and King's Knight. The movie novelization confirms that he only has 1 King's Knight, and obviously there's only 1 copy of each god in existence. It almost definitely is an animation error, but still counts as a cheat. On Yugi's final turn, Yugi has done some switcheroos of his own, as he's shown to draw a Diffusion Wave Motion, but out of nowhere he activates Double Spell,
I activate Double Spell,
which he was never shown to have at any point before this, and his hand was also empty. This also isn't really a cheat. When Yugi uses Kaiba Return from a different dimension, he mentions that Kaiba wanted a perfect victory,
when Kaiba spoke of dealing me the perfect defeat,
which was fine, except for the part that Kaiba never said his part out loud, he only thought it.
No, I wanted a perfect victory.
Almost definitely a continuity error, but it is funny to think that Yugi was reading Kaiba's mind the entire time. For Bonds Beyond Time in Yugi, Jaden, and Yusei's duel against Paradox, Yugi commits a sort of half cheat here. Jaden activates Flute of Summoning Kuribo, letting him add a Kuribo or Wing Kuribo from his deck to his hand, but instead, Yugi adds Kuribo to his hand, which under Tag Team rules, if an effect would special summon from the deck or add a card from the deck to the hand, the currently acting player performs the effect using their own deck. So as Yugi was the one who activates Flute directly up summoning Kuriboh, it would be him getting Winged Kuriboh from his deck, not Yugi. There's a couple problems with adding this to the cheat counter though, as Jaden was also just as complicit in this cheat, as he's the one who's activated it. And while I'm using the official rules, there's nothing guaranteeing that the anime rules also use them, so I won't count this one.
So with that all being said and done, Yugi cheats 56 times.
But there's also another thing I want to point out, and it's that at the end of the ceremony duel, Shizu makes this comment.
You're wrong. You see, the Pharaoh didn't predict what his next card would be. His willpower made it so.
Which makes all these duels like here, or here, or here, or here extremely suspect, as Yugi is basically able to cheat any card he wants to the top of the deck. We see multiple times him just drawing a card without looking at it, and already knowing what it is, which means that in every single duel, in every single draw, there's always the question of, did Yugi cheat this draw out? But you might say, in anime drawing cards is technically a skill, which sure is true. But what Yugi did was the equivalent of using steroids, given that he used an ancient Egyptian artifact, which gave him access to millennia-old spirit who can literally manipulate fate and even duel for him, which in my personal opinion definitely counts as cheating. After all, it basically means that whenever you're dueling against Yugi, you're technically dueling against two different people. So to answer the question I asked at the start of the video, how many times does Yugi cheat? Given that he duels with the Pharaoh in basically every duel, the real answer is simple. Yugi's cheated in every single duel. And if you want to see why Yugi cheats so much, it's because his entire deck makes absolutely no sense. So click on this video on the right to see why Yugi's deck was so bad that he had to cheat in basically every duel to win.
Over the course of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime, Yugi Muto, the king of games, faces off against many powerful foes, and time again is shown to be the most powerful duelist in the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! And through his various iconic battles, Yugi has regularly shown why he's the best of the best, and with every great duelist lies an iconic deck, which Yugi uses several of, such as his Grandpa's deck when facing down Kaiba and his 3 powerful Blue Eyes White Dragons, or his well-renowned Battle City deck, which contains the 3 Almighty God cards. As a casual viewer, you might get the impression that Yugi's deck was the best in the entire show, and if you were to copy his deck and fill it with Dark Magician, Slifer the Sky Dragon, and Exodia, you could achieve similar success. So I thought it might be a fun exercise to examine which of Yugi's deck was him at his peak, through the lens of a more realistic approach. So to start off, we have Yugi's first deck, which we only see Black Clan Fire Dragon. Yeah, not much to go off of here. Now we have Grandpa's deck, which we only see Yugi using twice. First in a duel against Kaiba, and the second being the Shadow Game duel against Pegasus. Given that the deck is only present for 2 duels, there isn't much to gleam over, but from what we do see, his Grandpa's deck contains mainly monster cards, with the only 2 effect monsters being Sangan and a main piece of Exodia, with only 2 spell cards, or magic cards at the time, contained in his deck. As you can see, this deck is pretty Unga Bunga, with the main premise just hoping that you have the higher attack monster. Of course, that's to be expected given that at this point in the anime, dual monsters as a concept was not fleshed out. The presence of Exodia, however, is probably the most interesting aspect of the deck. In the context of the first duel in the anime, it serves as a cool plot device which allows Yugi to turn the ropes on Kaiba to allow a comeback narratively. However, as adding value to the deck, it falls in that aspect. We know that his Grandpa's deck contained only 40 cards, so at least that streamlined the win condition of Exodia. However, in some ways, the higher chance of drawing Exodia might actually have been a detriment. The win conditions for Exodia state that you need all 5 pieces in your hand, which means that you need to run all 5 monsters, which individually are awful given their poor stats, and so would take up the place of any other monsters that could actually beat over any other monsters. You would effectively be drawing into dead cards that serve no other purpose than being fodderized by literally any monster, until you'd get all 5, which would be quite rare. Obviously, you aren't running Exodia for their stats, but instant win condition. So how reliable is this? Well, just like dual monsters, we can use another archaic method of solving problems that has existed since Egypt: math. Through some magical trickery, we get the chance of drawing Exodia if we draw 5 cards in a 40 card deck. 0.000151974%, or once per 658,000 duels. Not the best odds. But we still have the chance of drawing Exodia with each turn, right? Well, unfortunately, for a large number of turns, until your 17th turn, the odds of drawing all 5 pieces reach 1%. Unless, of course, the duel hasn't ended yet, or because you have 3 pieces of Exodia in your hand, clogging up any chance of making a play. It's only until 26 cards now have been drawn that you reach 10% of having all 5 pieces. Now, with the way Exodia decks worked in real TCG, a lot of deck thinners would be used to reach Exodia faster, like using Royal Magical Library Spell Spam. In Grampus deck, from what we know, there's only Sangan and Swords of Revealing Light to have the cheapest goal, with the rest of the deck functioning as a normal deck. So is Exodia good if you're an anime protagonist with the power of plot and weirdly shaped hair? Yes. If you're just an average guy, not so much. 0 out of 10. From what little we are shown, the deck is really awful. It's mainly comprised of normal monsters, with at best mediocre attack, with spells that again are pretty bad, and contains Exodia, which mathematically is going to be useless most of the time. Sona Anime isn't exactly clear whether or not the deck Yugi uses throughout Duel's Kingdom is solely his Grandpa's deck, or a combination of his own and his Grandpa's. The only possible clues we get are from the manga, where Yugi is shown combining his and his Grandpa's deck to use in preparation for Duel's Kingdom. So we will assume that from onwards, where Weevil throws away Exodia, off-screen Yugi modifies his Grandpa's deck to include cards from his own deck. As we can see with this deck, we can actually see a lot more utility in the form of the increased spell and trap lineup. That still doesn't make for the lack of monster quality. We still have the usual normal monster junk and are still very mediocre, with the highest normal summonable monster only being 1500. As you can see, you'll probably have a hard time beating over many monsters with the basic lineup of monsters we have. If push comes to shove and you'll need to turtle up, you do have some surprisingly good defensive options, with Mystical Elf and Giant Soldier of Stone possessing a nice 2000 defense, which will probably will given how awful the deck is. So what about the level 5 and higher monsters? Well, again, the monster lineup isn't much to talk about. We again have Dark Magician and Guy from Grampus deck, which for 2 tributes is still awful given the low payoff you receive, with the only good monsters being Summon Skull with a beastly 2500 attack points for only a single tribute summon, making it the best monster in the deck, despite what the anime wants you to believe. There is also the addition of new exciting powerful ritual monsters in the form of Black Cluster Soldier and Magician of Black Chaos. These cards boast an impressive attack of 3000 and 2800, which are the highest in Yugi's deck to date. So in theory, they should be great additions, right? Well, to let me fully explain this, let me give a quick crash course in card advantage. Card advantage is the premise that simply, if you have more cards than your opponent, you're more likely to have an edge, which is pretty simple enough to understand. This idea is pretty intuitive. Take, for example, if a player has 7 cards on their hand and field, and an opponent only has 3 cards in their hand and field, so obviously the player with more cards is more likely to win. Now if we extrapolate this idea out to a card like Pot of Greed, many players would say this gives a +1 in card advantage, as you lose 1 spell, Pot of Greed, but you draw 2 new cards, hence the +1. So for example, if we were to ritual summon Black Cluster Soldier, we require Black Cluster Soldier, Black Cluster Ritual, and 2 monsters wherein their levels combine to be level 8. If we look at this in terms of card advantage, we are discarding 2 monsters, a spell, to summon 1 ritual monster, which is a -3 in card advantage for a 3000 beta. So not only do ritual monsters require a huge loss in card advantage, this essentially means they are detriments to the consistency of your deck, as if you only lack the ritual spell but have the ritual monster, or vice versa, you're left with an unusable card. We also see a relatively more impressive arsenal of spells and traps in the arc, which is surprising given the quality of the monsters, but that's not to say every spell is a hit. Book of Secret Arts and Full Moon only give 300 extra stats to both defense and attack to spellcasters and beasts respectively, which is a pretty lacking upgrade in power. But you'd also have to consider that Yugi only runs 3 beasts and 2 spellcasters in this deck, meaning that these cards are pretty much useless for the majority of the duel. We also have cards like Burning Land, which destroy both field spells, so it's dead if your opponent doesn't have a field spell, which is probably all the time. Breath of Light, which destroys all rocks, so useless against literally every deck. Or Maku the Magical Mist, which only boosts Summon Skull's attack. Thankfully, we do see some powerful cards that are used and arguably are quite broken in comparison to the rest of the deck, which is Mirror Force, Dark Hole, Brain Control, and Monster Reborn. With Monster Reborn, Yugi now has access to the revival of any monster from the grave, even his opponents. Now when any powerful monster such as Dark Magician or Blue Eyes is sent to the grave, he has access to resummon them to his field, which is quite powerful given that you can use it as either a way to advance his board state after the destruction of an enemy boss monster, or use it as a crucial sacrifice for a more powerful monster, which helps immensely with how specialist summoning comes few and far between during this era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark Hole and Mirror Force serve as great mass removal of any troublesome monsters, or multiple monsters that cannot be ran over with attacking. Not only that, but they can heavily punish overextending of the opponent's field. If you use Dark Hole on an opponent's board full of monsters, this may leave the opponent with no strong monsters in their hand if they're unlucky. Brain Control not only comes as another form of, but also allows you to gain possession of the monster, which could quite literally, single-handedly win the game based on how powerful the card is. So how good is this deck? Well, honestly, even with the presence of a more varied and powerful spell and trap lineup, the deck is still incredibly weak in comparison to later decks. There's just too little offensive power, which is always a bad thing where it seems the main strategy is through beatdown. Although the deck possesses some incredibly strong staple cards, such as Brain Control or Dark Hole, they're still the only real strong points of the deck. These highlights aren't enough to carry the power level of the deck any higher. The deck is still incredibly weak and lacks any sort of clear win.
Okay.
Uncritically.
Let's just
People only see.
stop with this. Maybe even.
You've doubtlessly heard that flying is bad for the planet. And yes, compared to other forms of transport, it emits a lot of CO2 for every kilometre that you as a passenger travel. Compare it to the Eurostar.
So if you want to limit the impact of flying, the best way to do that is to not fly.
But that's not always going to be possible. Imagine that you're in the UK, but you have family in New Zealand. Sure, you can see each other less often, but at some point you're actually going to want to give each other a hug. But fortunately, there is a way to halve the climate impact of any flights that you do take. And it's all to do with these. Right, let's get this out of the way. These are not chemtrails. Chemtrails is a conspiracy theory that malign forces are spraying chemicals from passenger aircraft to accomplish evil? And while there were experiments in the 50s and 60s spraying chemicals out of planes, A, it isn't the 50s or 60s anymore, those kind of experiments just don't happen, and B, these are contrails. Contrails, or condensation trails, are ice crystal clouds formed in the immediate wake of aircraft. You see, for a water or ice cloud to form, it needs two things. Obviously, water, but also somewhere for that water, or ice, to start growing, what we call a condensation nucleus.
And the exhaust from jet engines is mostly CO2 and water, with a bunch of other crud like soot, which are perfect condensation nuclei. So in one package behind a plane, you have both the materials to make a cloud and places for that cloud to get started.
But why are these important? Well, when you think of the climate impact of flying, you probably think of the jet fuel. You burn it, you release a bunch of CO2 into the atmosphere, and that warms the planet, which is correct. But think about why the CO2 warms the planet.
CO2 is a greenhouse gas, meaning that it prevents long wavelength thermal radiation from escaping into space. Less energy is leaving the planet than is arriving at the planet, because CO2 doesn't interact with short wavelength radiation like sunlight, and the resulting energy imbalance raises the planet's temperature.
But CO2 isn't the only thing that affects the planet's energy balance. Perhaps the most complicated influence on the planet's temperature comes from clouds. You see, clouds do two things. They're white, which means they reflect sunlight, reducing the amount of energy coming into the atmosphere. But being made of water, which also efficiently absorbs long wavelength radiation, they're very effective at trapping heat too. So they both cool and warm the planet. Generally speaking, if a cloud is low in the atmosphere, like a stratocumulus cloud, the cooling part wins out, while if it's high in the atmosphere, like a cirrus cloud, then the warming part wins out. If you want to get nerdy about it, that's because the cloud radiates heat at a high temperature when low in the atmosphere versus at a low temperature when high in the troposphere, because the lapse rate of the troposphere is negative. It gets colder as you go higher up. These posters are available on the Nebula store, by the way. Contrails are artificial cirrus clouds. They're high in the atmosphere, not intercepting much sunlight because of how thin they are, but very effectively trapping heat. So they are a net warming influence on the planet. In fact, the energy imbalance caused by contrails is roughly equivalent to the warming effect of all CO2 emitted by all jet fuel burned by all planes to date. And I know that you quite possibly just went, that can't be right. And I get it, it is counterintuitive. I think because we collectively underestimate how cold the upper troposphere, where contrails radiate their heat, is, and so how much these clouds lower the effective radiative temperature of the planet. But while we're stuck with all the CO2 from burning jet fuel, that's staying in the atmosphere for the time being, if we could just stop planes from forming contrails, we could eliminate their energy imbalance within days. Just stop planes forming contrails. If only if it was that easy. Well, actually, recent analysis by Frias et al. Indicates that contrail climate forcing could be reduced by 73%, with an increase in costs of 0.08%? That can't be right.
Yeah, my reaction was certainly, that can't be right. And what have we missed here?
This is Mark Stettler, professor in transport and the environment at Imperial College London and one of the authors of this paper. And yes, that statistic is truly incredible, but when you look at how and where contrails form, it actually makes sense. You see, for a contrail that contributes significantly to warming to form, you need certain atmospheric conditions. A plane has to be flying through a relatively cold part of the sky that has a lot of water vapor in it, what we call an ice supersaturated region. And while these parts of the sky can be hundreds of kilometers across, they're generally less than a kilometer deep vertically. So in 2020, Mark published a paper asking what would happen if planes just tried to avoid these regions.
Yeah, it's a paper that we published in 2020 looking at flights over the Japanese airspace. It was an airspace where we could get really good data on flights and flight trajectories. And we looked at how those flights intersected with regions of the atmosphere where contrails form and persist. And we did a very simple study where we said, well, what happens if aircraft fly 2,000 feet above or 2,000 feet below those regions where contrails form and persist? And showed that actually a majority of flights don't have a significant contrail impact. A minority of flights do. So we came up with an estimate that 2% of flights accounted for 80% of the contrail warming, and that we could reduce a significant proportion of that by doing those very simple altitude changes.
However, that first paper was just looking at Japanese airspace, which is why this more recent paper was released, which was much more sophisticated.
For this study, we looked at all of the flights from a major global airline, and we used a flight planning tool that is operational. So a flight planning tool that is able to account for regions where contrails are forecasted to form and persist, in addition to having accurate estimates of the aircraft performance and aircraft fuel burn. And so using that tool, we're able to kind of come up with realistic deviations to the original flight plan in response to those contrail forecasted regions. And so by running it through this commercial flight planning tool, we're getting the best representation of what might happen in the real world if an airline was to implement this operationally. And going back to the kind of original story of the 2020 paper, which is that a minority of flights cause the majority of the warming, because you're only having to deal with a small minority of the flights, any additional costs on fuel burn, for instance, then gets spread out across the whole fleet and becomes a very, very small number.
So just to restate what this paper found, if you slightly change the flight paths of about 1 in 20 flights by this airline, often just changing their altitude, you would reduce the warming effect of their contrails by 73%. And while you are burning slightly more jet fuel doing this, generating more CO2, the contrails generate so much more warming that the trade-off is just absolutely worth it. And if you spread the cost of doing so over all the flights of this airline, it adds a couple of dollars to each ticket. In fact, and this is somewhat comparing apples and oranges, you could say that by reducing contrails, you avoid the warming equivalent to that caused by a certain amount of CO2 being emitted.
For example, diverting a flight might prevent the formation of a contrail that would have warmed the planet by the same amount as 100 tons of CO2, and that diversion might cost $150. The 2024 paper estimates that most flight diversions work out to the equivalent of paying less than $1 for every ton of CO2 emissions that you avoid. The most recent estimate is that overall, contrail avoidance comes in at about $1.75 per ton of CO2 avoided.
And just to put that in perspective, this is what's called a marginal abatement curve, which ranks how cost-effective different climate solutions are versus how large an impact they will have. You'll note that these chunks over here on the left, electric vehicles and clean electricity, have negative cost because the cost of implementing them is more than matched by the savings they offer between now and 2050. But also note the scale. This is from the UK's Climate Change Committee, so it's in pounds, but these solutions on the right cost hundreds of pounds, hundreds of dollars, for every ton of CO2 that you avoid emitting. Notably, right on the end, you've got carbon capture and storage, but next to that, you have SAF. SAF stands for Sustainable Aviation Fuel, alternatives to jet fuel that can be synthesized or grown, and currently the aviation industry's leading climate strategy. Except these fuels, which should in theory be nearly carbon neutral, currently represent just 0.3% of all jet fuel use, partly because they're just so expensive. They abate carbon emissions at a cost of hundreds of dollars per ton. And yes, that cost will come down over time, but time is not something we have a lot of. This is the critical decade to bring down our emissions as fast as possible to limit the warming we experience this century. So if diverting a small percentage of flights is extremely effective at reducing their warming impact, quick to have an impact, and extremely cost efficient, why aren't airlines doing this already? But before I answer that, I just want to say a quick thank you to my patrons over on patreon.com/SimonOxBiz.
Without Patreon, I could not make these videos. So in exchange for as little as £3 a month, I offer my patrons early access to videos, exclusive content, including bonus interviews and a monthly behind-the-scenes vlog, and producer patrons can vote on topics for me to cover in videos. Thank you to all my patrons, but a special thank you to Stefan Quertup, open square bracket, and Red Oxenbein. Thank you so much.
So, why aren't airlines diverting a small percentage of their flights to avoid creating contrails? Well, firstly, the paper did only come out last year, and these things do take a bit of time. But secondly, amazingly, some airlines are actually already trying this.
The flight planning tool that we use is from a commercial company called FlightKeys. They provide flight planning services to a number of airlines around the world, including American Airlines. And so American Airlines have done, to date, 2 operational trials of avoiding contrails, contrail management in their real world operations. But it has worked. Again, there's some challenges in terms of winning people over, and initially it's showing that actually from an operational point of view, it's feasible and it could be done. That's at the airline level. So that's with one single airline. I think there's sort of, as we think about then scaling that up, there's more challenges that come up. So what if you get multiple airlines wanting to do the same deviation maneuver? Or how do you manage that in very congested airspaces at congested times? We're not kind of aiming for the perfect solution at this stage, but by doing these trials, by doing these tests, we're learning a huge amount about how the aviation system works and how you can incorporate new information into flight planning and flight management.
And American Airlines aren't alone. Based on their success, other airlines, including European airline TUI, have run their own trials.
I'm confident that the next couple of years there will be a scale-up of trials and demonstrations, perhaps looking at air traffic control areas that are managed by what are called air navigation service providers. So no one's saying that, we're going to do this without consideration of other complications and constraints, and safety continues to be the number one priority for aviation. But I think as we demonstrate success, we can kind of continue to build that scale.
Arguably the biggest challenge at this point is making this easy and safe for airlines. So rather than having just a meteorologist with a forecast and a phone manually telling planes which bits of sky to avoid, incorporating this into the routing systems that planes use by default. And that's a conversation that's happening between Mark and his colleagues at contrails.org and industry. You can actually see who they're working with on their website, which I'd highly recommend you check out. But if you're watching this and thinking, I don't want to wait for the airlines to get around to doing this, what can I do to help? Well, apart from not flying, there's 3 things. The first of which is also found at contrails.org, or more specifically, map.contrails.org.
It's a sort of educational tool. So you can click on a flight and you can search for a flight, and it will tell you whether that flight is likely to have formed a contrail or not, and you'll see it represented on the globe. We're projecting those contrail regions forward in time, so you see them evolve. You'll notice that, over large areas of the world, there are no contrails, but then you'll see these sort of orange patches or blue patches, and those are representing contrails. And the orange color means that they're sort of having a warming effect. Typically, those are contrails that are persisting over the nighttime, where they're trapping heat from escaping out to space.
I'd recommend playing with this tool to get a sense of where these contrails form and which routes have the potential to be a problem. Then, when you're next choosing a flight, factor in the impact of contrails.
One thing that I've been working with Google on is their Google Flights tool, and they set up a travel impact model and a committee to help advance that tool and continue to improve it, both in terms of capability but also transparency. That has led to a contrail indicator when you're booking a flight. It is also available on other platforms. Now, those estimates come with uncertainty ranges because we're trying to predict something months in advance sometimes, but we've given sort of low, moderate, or high scaling. So those are some practical steps.
And lastly, write to your airline. Frankly, I think the big reason airlines haven't wholesale adopted this yet is because the public doesn't know this is an option. So the next time that you fly, make sure your airline knows that you know they could be doing this. Send them an email, something like, hello, Ape Air, do you incorporate contrail avoidance into your flight routing, or are you planning to take part in one of the many trials in contrail avoidance? Here's a website explaining how easy and effective it is. Yours truly, Mrs. Trellis of North Wales. I don't know. But even if we do all of this, and I do think we should, that's still only addressing half the problem.
Contrails are very significant, but that doesn't deal with the CO2 aspects. And so aviation still needs to grapple with the CO2 emissions that it's responsible for. And that's where things like sustainable aviation fuels come in, longer term, potentially electric aircraft or other technology solutions. And I would also say that we shouldn't be saying that just because we're avoiding contrails means we can do less action on CO2. We need to do this work on contrails, and we need to continue to work on CO2. We can't do one or the other.
Now, you may have recognized this globe. I made it for a video earlier this year talking about how much progress the world has made turning the ship on climate change.
But did you know that I also made a video showing you how I made this globe from start to finish, including using a projector to get the land masses right and painting in all the biomes, but also a video about how the UK banned disposable vapes and extended interviews with experts on misinformation and AI. None of these are on my YouTube channel.
All of these videos and more were released on my Nebula channel this year, and you can watch them all for free for 3 days because Nebula, the streaming service owned and operated by creators, including this guy, is now offering free trials. In those 3 days, you could watch high-quality videos from over 100 thoughtful creators without any adverts before they're released on YouTube, but you could also watch exclusive programming like Scav, the new documentary series about the absolutely insane scavenger hunt they have at the University of Chicago every year. Seriously, get a free trial, see how much stuff you can watch in 3 days. For many people, it's the Christmas holidays right now. What better time? And after those 3 days, if you haven't watched everything that you would like to watch, you can get yourself a subscription at go.nebula.tv/Simon Clark, and if you use that link, you'll get 50% off an annual subscription. And if you've already got a subscription, I'd just like to point out that you can also gift Nebula access. It's a way of saying to someone in your life, hey, I think you've got great taste, and you'd like to support creators in their independence from megalithic tech corporations. That link again was go.nebula.tv/Simon Clark to support my work and see how this was made and much, much more. Thank you for watching, and a special thank you to Professor Stettler and the team at Contrails.org for being so helpful in answering my questions, and to Dr. Hannah Ritchie for making me aware of this campaign and for providing notes on an early draft. And of course, thank you for watching. If you'd like to watch something else from me next, here's 2 videos I prepared earlier, which just leaves me to say thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
Come on. Okay, so contrails. A bit worse than chemtrails.
Hello, beautiful people, and welcome, to the return of Spiral Abyss as endgame content. Oh boy. Yeah, this new Abyss is certainly a bit more challenging than Abyss has been ever, actually. We have an insanely difficult, comparatively, Chamber 1 that I think there's a bunch of accounts that are able to do Fearless that will actually struggle clearing Chamber 1. I think most of them, with proper positioning with the right teams, will still be able to clear Chamber 1, but it will not be the trivial adventure that Spiral Abyss has been for accounts that can clear Fearless since Siege and Onslaught came out. Chamber 1 has 41 enemies. That's a lot of enemies. We first have dogs, and there's quite a few dogs. One might even wonder how this even happened. Like, who exactly let the dogs out for there to be 25 dogs in Abyss? Bruh. Anyways, there's 25 dogs, and there's don't give me ... There's 25 dogs, and they spawn in groups of 5, but it's not exactly in waves. You get 5 dogs at a time, and anytime you kill a dog, a new dog appears until you've killed all 25. They spawn relatively close to one another, but it's very easy to ungroup them with Stagger, so you gotta be a little bit careful about that. Once you're done with the 25 dogs, which are relatively squishy, if you have good AoE, each dog is about a little bit less than 300k, so you only have to do a bit less than 300k 5 times in AoE. It's not too bad, theoretically. Anyways, after the dogs, we have Citizen Mages. This is where the real problem tends to come in. Citizen Mages are twice as tanky, but also they're a lot lighter than the dogs, so they get knocked around very easily, and it's really easy to ungroup them. And because they're range characters, they don't really regroup themselves once you ungroup them. And they can end up getting elemental shields if you leave them alone for too long once you ungroup them and you're only attacking one of the clusters at a time. The Citizen Mages spawn in groups of 3 instead of 5, but it's the same idea where anytime you kill one, the next one will spawn. You don't have to kill all 3 for the next wave to spawn. And there's 15 of them. And finally, after that, you have a last wave with a 1.2 million HP enemy. It's not too bad, but if your team is heavily focused on AoE for the first 2 portions, there are some teams that have worse damage in single target than in AoE. So first team you'd think of here would be like a Nilo team, for example, although good Nilo teams with Llama won't struggle here. Bad Nilo teams without Llama might struggle a little bit more against this enemy. Honestly though, the biggest problem with this chamber is that it just has so much HP to the point where if you're focusing entirely on grouping, you're actually going to be lacking damage a little. Like the first thing you would think when seeing an Abyss like this is a Venti, and you're not entirely wrong. Right, there was a Venti rerun and they want to make Venti look good, but the problem is, right, with the buffs when you play Venti as a carry, or just when you play Venti as a support, with carries that work well with him, which honestly often tend to be the carries that are a little bit weaker, you'll notice, yeah, you're keeping the enemy's group pretty well, but your teams are a lot weaker than the like strong meta teams right now. Because as it turns out, right, even with perfect grouping, you have to do 272k HP 5 times. So that's like 1.35 million HP, then another 2.5 million HP, and then another 1.2 million HP. So it's like basically 5 million HP, assuming you're always hitting perfect AoE. It's still 5 million damage of single target damage you need to be doing. That's a boss. That's more than most bosses, actually. So even with perfect AoE, you still need to be bringing a somewhat good team. Well, the problem is that after this chamber, you've got the Weasels. And if you don't have an actual plunge focused character, the Weasels can be pretty rough. There are a few characters that just straight up have enough DPS that they can ignore the Weasels mechanic. Namely, Skirk tends to do fairly decently into it. Nefer does all right into it, even if you're bringing them in teams that don't necessarily have plungers. But the Weasels mechanic is that it shields up, and once it's shielded up, you want to do plunge attacks to break the shield. If you don't have plunge attacks, you can still just deal damage to the shield, but it's really tanky. So you need a lot of damage in order to be able to do that. Effectively, it means you have to kill them one more time because the shield that they get is equal to 100% of their HP. So in order to break the shield without the plunge, you basically need to kill them one extra time, right? Break the shield once, which is their full HP, and then kill them. If you're doing that, obviously that brings this chamber. The second half, instead of being, you know, a little bit under 4 million, will be like 7, almost 8 million. Characters that involve using plunge attacks, like Veressa, will be able to do this chamber in like 20 seconds. Characters that are really strong and can brute force might be able to do this chamber in like 50 seconds. You're still pretty much always going to need 2 full rotations. And then outside of that, you're looking at like 1 minute 30 plus. But the problem is, 1 minute 30 is kind of what you're left with if you play a Venti team on the first side. It's straightforward and it's all right, but unironically, I would say that Venti is not the best character for Chamber 1, because while he does make the clear very straightforward and pretty brain dead, there are characters where if you're playing like very intentionally and you know what you're doing with your positioning, that will clear faster and give you just more breathing room for the Weasel. We'll get into what those characters are later, but before we do that, let's look at the rest of the Abyss. So as a whole, you have a buff whenever characters trigger Swirl, you get some true damage. This isn't that big of a buff, but because it's so breakpoint related here, if the dog survives at like 30k HP, the fact that you can kind of just kill it by doing a normal attack on Sucrose or on Venti during his burst or whatever is kind of nice, but it's not that meaningful. And then the Leyline Disorder. First half, off-field characters gain 75% pyro damage bonus. This is kind of bait. Like, it's good, but it doesn't even do that much because carry Durin teams, which are pretty much the only teams that care a lot about this, because this is a buff that, as far as I understand, is snapshotable, which means that characters who don't snapshot will get it while they're off field because it affects their stats dynamically. Characters who do snapshot do not get this buff because they don't have it when they snapshot because they're on field when they use their abilities. So channeling doesn't get this. So it's pretty much just for Durin and like I guess Moika's skill, but like who cares about that? That doesn't do any damage. But carry Durin, like the carry mode, the dark mode for Durin is single target. So it works really poorly in this chamber. And carry Durin teams that don't use dark mode are generally on field Durin, so they don't use this either. And or they use overload, so you don't want to play them in content that can get ungrouped easily. Honestly, this buff is like insane bait. Durin isn't bad in the first half, but you shouldn't build your teams around trying to put Durin in. You should just do your best team for this content, and if Durin is in there, then Durin is in there. Anyways, second half Leyline is character plunge attack damage increased by 75%. Now, the Weasels have 50% power resistance. There are not that many plunge carries in the game, right? There's Veressa, Chao, Gaming, and that's kind of it. There are characters you can turn into plunge carries, like Hu Tao, Navia, whatever, but the ones that are actually dedicated to plunge are those. And Gaming, well, is Pyro, so he's not going to feel as good against these enemies with power resistance. And Chao is, well, bad, so he's not going to feel that great either, which leaves you with pretty much just Veressa. It's kind of like how when there's a normal attack buff, it's for Arlecchino, but like when there's a Pyro normal attack buff, like it's for Arlecchino, but like I guess Yoimiya gets it too. This is the same for Veressa and Chao basically. But don't force Chao over one of your good carries just because of this buff. He'll probably be weaker than one of your good carries if your good carry works for this. Anyways, Chamber 2 is generally very, very straightforward. It doesn't really affect your team building in any way. The one thing it can change is, well, these enemies are Hydro immune, so Molani. Although honestly, if you're playing a Molani Durin team with Llama, like a Burn Vape Molani team, you can have Burgeon Durin on Chamber 2. And because Chamber 2 is honestly just a lot easier than the other two chambers, you should be fine, but it's still not ideal. But I want you guys to notice something. I'm saying Chamber 2 is the easiest chamber here, and honestly, by a long shot. And this is a chamber that has 9 million HP. 8 million is not the total HP of every enemy. It's the HP of the highest HP enemy of each wave added together. So this is assuming you will have perfect AoE. This is assuming your damage is hitting every target at the same time. The total amount of HP is higher. Anyways, last chamber, super heavy Land Rover, mechanized fortress on the first side, the Plunge Local Legend on the second side. Plunge Local Legend, very straightforward. It's pretty much impossible to come up with a team that doesn't have a way to break the shield, because you need to do blunt attacks to break the shield, and every character's plunge attack that is a claymore, a sword, or a polearm is blunt. So unless your team is only catalysts and bow users, pretty much anything can brute force this. I guess technically there are some Nefer teams that are all catalysts and bow users, but like just put I know in the bag and you're fine. And honestly, I mean, we'll get into specific tips for this enemy later, but just in terms of team building as a whole, this doesn't really change much. And in terms of HP, it's just not that tanky compared to the rest. And unlike the Weasels, the Plunge Local Legend has a gravity field that lets you jump, so you don't need to come up with creative ways of doing plunge attacks. The problem in Chamber 3 is this enemy. This enemy has 4 different phases. In the first phase, he's basically invulnerable. Don't even bother trying to do damage. 150 resistance to everything. You are cooked. In order to get it to the next phase, you need to hit it with pyro attacks. If you're hitting with a higher pyro application, it's also a little bit faster, but it's not necessary as long as it's pyro attacks. You need 120 pyro attacks. That's a big number. I'd say that this is honestly more of a Venti shill than Chamber 1 is. Because Venti's burst with a Witch Bus, right? 20 hits of Pyro plus 25 hits of Animo that can swirl on like 9 of the hits, I think. And then his normal attacks can also swirl. Like, as if you have Venti plus an off-field Pyro, you get through this fairly quickly. He's not the only way you can do it though. Anyways, you don't need to do 120 hits though, because once you've done 60 hits, once the bar is half full, it goes to its second phase. In its second phase, its resistances are still high at 50, but they're not unreasonably high. The resistance formula is kind of weird at really high resistances, but you can basically think of it this way. If an enemy has above 75% resistance, it's basically invulnerable. Don't bother hitting it. Once you get it to base resistances in the 50 range, then with Shred, you can bring that to 0 or even below. But even if you don't bring it to 0, bring it to 30, bring it to 20, that's still reasonable. Shred doesn't do much if you're not bringing the enemy down below 75, because the way that the formula works is a little finicky. But between 0 and 75, resistance works just like you would expect it to. 1% resistance means that the enemy takes 1% less damage. So if the enemy has 75% resistance, they take 75% less damage, so your damage is divided by 4. And if you shred that resistance by 50, bring it to 25 instead of 75, instead of the damage being divided by 4, it's reduced by 25%. So instead of your 4 damage being 1, it's 3. So that shred effectively tripled your damage. Same idea here. Between 50 and 0, your shred basically doubles your damage. Between 150 and 100, it does basically nothing. All of this to say, if you have some shred on your team, you can actually deal impactful damage during the second phase. The second phase isn't really meaningfully different from the first phase in terms of what the boss is doing though. I don't even know what attacks this boss does, because it's like always aiming behind you or something. They f***ed up his targeting. He just doesn't really hit you, so it doesn't really matter. Anyways, yeah, during this phase you can deal damage to it, and once you fill those 120 instances of pyro damage, it enters its third phase. During the third phase, he gets a cryo shield. The cryo shield is 28 units of cryo, which requires 14 pyro applications or 7 2U pyro applications, or a mix of those, in order to break. And you only have 18 seconds to do it. And if you take longer than 18 seconds, it just resets, and then you're kind of cooked. But if you break the shield in those 18 seconds, it'll take 30% of its current HP as damage, and then it goes in a weakened phase where it just lays there like a tired idiot with resistances at minus 20%. After that phase, which lasts about enough time for one rotation, it resets again. So generally the strategy you want to go with here is you either try to go for as much pyro as possible, get through the first 2 phases really quickly, get through the cryo shield quickly, and then do a rotation on the down, and then just do that again. Or there are some teams that can kill it in one down, so it becomes favorable to sacrifice a little bit of speed on your first shield breaking in order to reach the damage threshold to kill it in one down. Now, its amount of HP is relatively high to try to one down. It's 4.5 million HP, but if you've done some damage to it during the second phase when his resistances are 50, maybe be at like 3.5 million by the time you get to the cryo shield. And then once you break the cryo shield, he takes 30% of that, so he takes like another million. And then you only have to do like 2.5 million HP worth of damage, which there are quite a few teams that are able to do. Maybe not at KQM standard, but like at the sort of investment that people that are doing Fearless will have. Now, a few things to note. 28U cryo means 14 applications of pyro, and Durin's pyro application isn't actually that good. Durin by himself doesn't have a good time against the shield if you don't have another way to weaken the shield. There are quite a few other ways to weaken the shield, because any element that can react with cryo other than hydro will weaken the shield if you hit it. Even if you wouldn't think of it as a good way to do the cryo shield break, Durin gets really close by himself, so you really don't need that much more. But like an Anemo unit that can swirl, a Geo unit that can crystallize, an Electro unit that can superconduct will generally be enough to bring Durin over the edge, and you won't necessarily need to bring a second pyro. If you're bringing an Anemo unit, you might think that you need to pyro absorb like Venti's Burst or something to get the shield, but generally you don't. Generally, the Anemo application by itself is enough. Anyways, so what the heck can you do? Well, obviously, you can always brute force it with just very strong characters. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you which characters are very strong generally. Pretty much all the new stuff is like good enough to brute force. But what if you don't have the new stuff? You have a few ways of breaking the shield faster, and sometimes it can be worth warping your team for it. Characters like Ororon or Citlali can do a hold jump to get a plunge attack. Mawika can do the double jump to start flying on the bike to get a plunge attack. Zhongli and Albedo can provide you with the height through their constructs, GeoMC as well, to get your jumps. Obviously, no surprise, Shanyan. Venti can hold E, give you the thing. I know with her hold E can technically do it, but you can't do it multiple times. Technically, you can bring Sak. Kazuha can do it. Kating can do it. Generally, though, it's not worth bringing a bad carry in order to get the plunge, but a worse support can be worth it. There are also a few characters that can abuse the weird-ass Weasel hitbox. So, while the Weasel is shielded, it has a really weirdly shaped hitbox that you can kind of jump into, and because it's like a dome, if you jump into it with some characters, you can actually get enough extra height to get a plunge attack. Honestly, getting that reliably has been a bit difficult for me. Generally, the characters that have higher jumps than usual, but still not enough to plunge, so like Shilonen during her skill, for example, can do it a little bit more easily from what I've heard, but I'm not able to replicate it consistently. Other than that, you can do the good old Dragon Strike. Something I realized recently is that Razor is actually really easy to Dragon Strike with compared to other Claymore characters, because the way that Dragon Strike works is it uses hit lag. Hit lag is what happens when you use an attack against an enemy, and when it collides, your character's model freezes for a few frames to make it feel like there's resistance. Your weapon collided with an enemy, so the character stops. They're not just hitting through butter, they're hitting something. But there are a few things that get paused and a few things that don't get paused during hit lag. And one of the weird things that gets paused during hit lag, from what I understand, is vertical momentum, which means if you can time a jump to happen during hit lag, you can jump higher. The reason why Dragon Strike is easier with Claymore characters is because Claymore characters generally have longer hit lag in order to make their weapons feel heavier. If you use dash jump during hit lag, because a dash jump goes a little bit higher than a normal jump, that paired with your paused vertical momentum during hit lag gets you just that tiny little bit of extra height that puts your character high enough in the air to allow them to do a plunge attack. The longer the hit lag is, the easier it will be to Dragon Strike, and the more movement speed you have, the easier it will be to Dragon Strike. So taller characters tend to be better at Dragon Striking because they just run faster. Anemo Resonance or Diona's Shield can make Dragon Strike more easy to replicate, and you generally want to try Dragon Striking on your attacks that have the longest hit lag. But one thing that I realized recently is that there's a weird time when you use Razor's skill where you're kind of locked out of using animations. If I use Razor's skill and then I spam dash after using the skill, Even if I start spamming the dash before the skill hits, it doesn't actually allow me to dash until the skill actually hits. And because of that, it removes the possibility of doing your Dragon Strike too early, which means you can kind of just spam dash and jump during the E animation, and you just get your Dragon Strike pretty easily. I'm trying to do it backwards now, which is a little bit... There we go. Just so that I can show that hey, we're not doing it from the enemy hitbox here. Right? It's just the normal Dragon Strike. I'm not bad at Genshin because I play it a lot, but I'm not particularly mechanically good at games. So if I can do it relatively consistently, you'll be able to do it too with a little bit of practice. And because of that, it effectively means that actually Razor's pretty good at this a bit. Razor as a whole is fairly good right now, and the fact that he can Dragon Strike makes him pretty decent against the Weasels too. If you're not Dragon Striking though, things will still be a little difficult. So yeah, and Dragon Strike is not ping dependent. It is frame rate dependent. I think it tends to be easier at 30 FPS than at 60 because you need to do it on the right frames. So when there's less frames, it's easier to time. But it's not a really major difference because it's easy enough on 60. Other than that, let's start talking about what other like specific characters are relatively good. For carries, first side Skirk, not gonna happen. You need the Pyro for this. 150 res is just too much, even with all the shred you get from SKP, and even if you're using Shenhe for the extra shred, that's still only 70% shred. It's not nearly enough. It brings you to 80%, which is still above that 75 that kind of makes resistance. If you're starting with Chamber 1 and you already have 3 stars on Chamber 3, you can use Skirk because she's fairly decent here. But if you're trying to do a continuous run, Skirk will not be your bet on the first side. Characters like Xiao can get through, but you're still generally better off just using better, like stronger meta characters as a whole. Varissa tends to be fine in Chamber 1 if you're reaching the breakpoint to kill the enemies in 2 plunges. If it takes more than 2 plunges to kill enemies, you'll start ungrouping them a bit too much, but you should be playing Varissa on second side anyways. Maoika works pretty great on the first side. The biggest issue with Maoika teams is that they don't tend to have the fastest pyro hits, so Chamber 3 might be a little bit slower, but good Maoika teams generally have pretty easily enough damage to kill the Mechanized Fortress in 1 down. So it won't necessarily be noticeably slower than your other options, right? In a perfect world, you want a team that breaks the shield fast and kills in 1 down. Out of the stuff I've tested, I've only actually managed to do that with Razor. One thing to notice though is that you are not getting through Chamber 1 with Razor. Do not try to play an overload team with characters that can't kill the enemies before they ungroup themselves in Chamber 1. When I did my clear trying to test Razor here, I barely got 2 stars on Chamber 1. If you're finding yourself struggling with an overload team against this boss specifically, you can consider giving Shalors more ER. Her burst is really good at doing a lot of pyro hits, so if you aren't getting your burst every rotation, it might be worth sacrificing a little bit of her HP for the attack buff, just so that you get more energy and you can burst more often. And if you ever C4...
Alright, looks like that's going to be it for this stream. The fuck do they do right now? Just now. Why did they do that? Oh god. Well, that was one pull. Right? Half asleep. What did they do again? Insufficient polychrome. Okay, I just spent one. Oh god. Imagine if I spent one of those. Can you tell me what is this much? Crit rate 20%. Okay, let's see. Errands. I just did white event. Don't want to do it. What I want to do is go here maybe.
It helps too. Nefer is surprisingly decent in Chamber 1 as long as you're adjusting your team properly. The best Nefer teams do not have a way to deal with this, but Nefer as a 3-unit team with Nefer Llama Ino isn't bad, or Nefer Llama any Hydro honestly, and it should generally be enough DPS because the positioning and size of her AoE is generally enough to deal with these enemies without too much of a problem. That you can kind of just play a 3-unit team and bring a character for shield break only. If you're doing that, I would generally recommend using Bennett because he's a healer for your team if you need healing on the other chambers, but he's also really good at breaking the shield because you don't need to have a lot of pyro hits because you already have Dendro, right? You have Dendro, so as long as you have any pyro, you get the burn, which is great for the first 2 phases. But burning can't proc on a cryo shield, so then what you actually care about isn't the speed of your pyro hits, is just getting as many units of pyro as possible. And because Bennett's burst and skill are 2U pyro instead of 1U, you only need to use 7 of them. If you have C6 and you weave in normal attacks, you might get through it with like 5 instead, which is pretty quick. You have other options, but generally Bennett is going to be your best bet because he's also a healer, so he's not completely worthless for the rest. And you actively want to avoid pyro application during your uptime because that ruins your Lunar Blues. For Chamber 2, obviously, Verissa is really good. I'd say that the next best character is probably not Chao. The next best character is probably Skirk because you can actually freeze the Weasel before it shields up. Now, you won't freeze the first Weasel before it shields up because it probably shields up by the time you've got your stuff deployed. But the second Weasel can be frozen before it shields up. And if you have enough damage, you can actually kill it before it gets unfrozen at all. And since needing to brute force means that you generally have to do the Weasel's HP bar 1 more time, it means that, well, with Skirk, instead of having to do it 4 times, you only have to do it 3 times if you manage to freeze it. Getting through this is generally pretty trivial. Pretty much all the teams that can brute force this can brute force this too, other than maybe Molani. But Molani doesn't have the best matchup here either because white shields prevent you from vaping and melting. And then again, right, this one is also just as long as you have a way to break the shield through spamming plunges on your support or whatever, you should be fine. So Chamber 2 generally isn't really a team building check, right? If you have Varessa, you get a lot more breathing room for Chamber 1 because Varessa as your second half will be way faster than anyone else. But there are quite a few carries that can deal with the first half without too much of a problem, even with the characters that take a bit longer for Weasel. Anyways, let's now go into the Abyss and give some more Chamber specific tips. So, all right, you've got the 5 dogs, and generally hitting them tends to make them ungroup pretty easily. I guess Mawiko doesn't really have any stagger. Like, they kind of slowly walk away, and if you have any form of stagger, it kind of makes them ungroup a little at the start too.
All right. Well, considering I'm half asleep this time, so go be fully asleep. It's going to be for